Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee meeting of the 25th of April 2022. This will be the last Scrutiny Committee of this particular council term. So I want to thank everybody for their perseverance so far, and we'll look forward to seeing some back and some not after the 5th of May. Perhaps I could call upon committee services first of all to do a roll call.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. Morning, everyone. Just to make you all aware, we have got 3 substitutes for this meeting today. We've got Councillor Hearn joining us, substituting for Councillor Harry Coates. Councillor Bailey is substituting for Councillor McDade, and Councillor Simpson for Councillor Liz Barrett. So I'll do the roll call. I'll go through the subs first and then go in the usual order. So Councillor Hearn.
Present.
Councillor Bailey. Yeah, Councillor Bailey's in the chambers here. So and Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Thank you. So go through the order. We've got Councillor Illingworth here in the chambers, as is Councillor Massey and Councillor Parrott. So not here. Councillor Jarvis.
Here.
Convener, we've heard from yourself. So Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Sawar.
Present.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So that should be everyone present who's meant to be here. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Danny. Before we go on to the main agenda items, can I please ask if there are any declarations of interest on any of the agenda items today? I don't see any hands or anything in the chat. So I'll assume there are no declarations of interest, and then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the minute of the Scrutiny Committee of the 9th of February 2022 for approval. Can we approve the minute?
Good.
Councillor Stewart, you have a question?
Yes. At the last meeting, when the Vice Convener was taking the meeting, he did say at about 5.5 to 6 minutes in, because of the number of issues that I'd raised, which are noted, to be fair, on this minute, that he wouldn't ask for acceptance of the minutes and would ask for the matters to be addressed and for the minutes to be re-presented to committee.
So that's the minute. These were questions on the minute of the 29th of November?
That's correct.
Okay. Vice Convener, would you like to address this? I, as you know, was not present at that meeting. So Vice Convener, could you please address that question from Councillor Stewart?
Convener, yes, that's certainly what I said, and therefore it's a surprise to me that those minutes are not with the papers today. Thank you.
So am I correct in assuming that the minute of the 29th of November has not been approved?
Yeah, it wasn't formally requested, given what the Vice Convener said at the last meeting.
Okay. So can I come back to the minute of the is the record of the minute of the last meeting on the 9th of February, is that accurate? Are there any Councillor Lewis Simpson, you have a matter arising?
Yes, thank you very much, Vice Convener. It's really on behalf of Councillor Liz Barrett on the last paragraph on page 8. I'm assuming it's a typo, but it says wishes to record his dissent, and perhaps it would be more accurate to say their dissent. Okay. It's on page 8, the third last line.
Good point. Can we have that corrected, please, for the minute?
Thank you very much indeed, Convener.
Thank you. Danny, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, just on the point from Councillor Simpson, that's obviously a typo, and I offer my apologies there to Councillor Barrett. With regards to the circulation of the the minute of the 29th of November to amend it. It was my understanding, and it could have been a misunderstanding going over the recording, and also from the meeting itself. It was my understanding that the minute was agreed, subject to those changes being recorded, and I felt the sort of best approach to that was as recorded in, as they have been, in the minute of the 9th of February. I'll be more than happy to look into to amend the minute of the 29th of November and circulate it to committee members ASAP if that's not deemed, if what's happened isn't deemed to be acceptable.
So my understanding from what's been said is that the minute of the 29th of November was agreed, but that the particular comments and matters effectively arising that Councillor Stewart raised were to be recorded in the minute of the 9th of February, which that has been the case. So I think that the minute of, I think what you've written, Danny, would seem to be that the minute of the 29th of November was accepted, providing that the issues raised were recorded in the minute of the 9th of February, which has been done. Councillor Stewart, does that answer your question?
Well, just from a strictly procedural point of view, that's not what happened. I mean, what we've got there is we didn't, the acting convener did not ask for approval of the minutes of the 29th of November. I guess with the additions noted, there, that covers the points that were raised, but strictly speaking, that's not the way it happened.
Okay, so Danny, in that case, can I ask that you circulate the minute of the 29th of November to the committee? I think in the interest of moving along briskly, can I ask if there are any objections to the minute of the 9th of February and its accuracy? Can we then agree the minute of the 9th of February?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Horsecross issue. I'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor Stewart. And if Danny can circulate the minute of the 29th of November so we all can have sight of it, we'll come back to that one and formally approve it, hopefully, after the Horsecross presentation. Is that acceptable?
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Stewart, you have a further matter arising. Is that from the minute of the 9th of February or the minute of the 29th of November?
Well, it is both.
Okay.
So the point is about Business Gateway. We were given undertakings that certain documents would be circulated to members of the committee. When I raised this last week, I was invited to pursue the matter with officers, but normally what happens is that committee services get hold of that information, and it's officers who circulate it post the meeting. And just to point out as well that we've never had a further, we had the presentation on Business Gateway. We asked a lot of questions about the issue, but we were going to have a further discussion about how to take matters forward in that respect, and that's never appeared on either the February agenda or today's agenda.
Okay. Lisa, can you perhaps address that one? Lisa Simpson.
Yep. Good morning, convener. Good morning,
Thank you,
councillors.
Lisa.
Obviously, I wasn't in attendance at the last meeting, but of course matters have been superseded by discussions at SPNR, and the SPNR committee have requested that I review the memorandum of understanding and report back to SPNR in due course. So I would report that's the way that we deal with these matters. And if there's anything to be brought back to scrutiny, then we will do that. But there is a live action from SPNR.
Okay, I think we should record that in a minute then. I wasn't made aware of that as the convener of this committee, so I think that is.
It was only at the end of last week, Councillor McCall.
Okay.
It was SPNR. It was SPNR last week, so it received some airing and some debate at SPNR last week. Fully discussed. Councillor Stewart was there, in fact, made an amendment. So this matter's already been raised, and I would suggest superseded by any outstanding request to scrutiny. But if there's anything that appropriately requires to be brought back to scrutiny, I will do that.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa. That's helpful. I wasn't at the last meeting either,
No.
scrutiny meeting, or indeed SPNR, since I no longer sit in that committee. Councillor Stewart, I think given that explanation from Lisa, it seems that this matter is being addressed internally within the council and by council officers, and SPNR seems the appropriate place for it to be examined further. Is that agreeable to you?
Well, I think I still would like the commitment that was made at Scrutiny Committee in November for documents to be circulated to members of Scrutiny Committee to be for that to happen. We were told that we would get if possible, the chief executive correspondence, and we were told that we would get. We were definitely told that we would get the memorandum of understanding circulated. The reason for bringing it up at SPNR as an amendment last week was because those things have so far not happened, but there was a business gateway item on the agenda, which, as I say, has not appeared on either February or April's Scrutiny Committee agenda. We were also told in November that the replacement contract, it's in the minute of, it's in the minute that you've just approved, that the replacement contract for the project management of Business Gateway would come back either to Scrutiny or to SPNR, and that also didn't happen. So it's just a question of, if these commitments are made at committee, I think it's just a process of good governance that we should follow through and make sure that those documents arrive in the inboxes of the relevant committee, which is this one.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think your point is well made. However, I do think that the events in SPNR have superseded that. Nevertheless, I think the original request for the documentation to be circulated among members of this committee was requested, and therefore I think that this committee should at least be made for information, if nothing else, be copied in that correspondence. Can that be arranged, Lisa, please?
Yeah, convener, what I've actually been asked to do is look at the memorandum of understanding and to present what the options are. So I'm quite happy to share that same paper with scrutiny in due course.
I don't think that's the same thing. That's the action from SPNR. I think what we're really seeking is that the actions that were committed to at the meeting on the 29th of November are fulfilled.
Well, yeah, well, I'm not actually aware of what the options are. I can't get the minute up from the 29th, so I don't know off the top of my head, but the issue being that just sending out a memorandum of understanding blindly without any context, and perhaps with my legal advice around that, might not be the most helpful for Scrutiny Committee. So I am undertaking to do that task for SPNR, and it would seem appropriate to do similar and present that back to Scrutiny, so that if there's any other outstanding issues that they wish to pursue, that we can take matters forward from Scrutiny's perspective at that point.
Okay, so for the purposes of moving this meeting along, I'm not entirely convinced that answers the commitment that was made on the 29th of November, but I think I will take this offline and I will respond myself to the Scrutiny Committee once I've spoken separately. Lisa, I think we're maybe talking a little bit cross purposes here, but I'm mindful of a number of items on the agenda today that we need to get through. Councillor Stewart, I shall liaise with you as well to make sure, because you raised this issue of the gateway process, business gateway process. So I will speak to you separately as well, and we will get this matter resolved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Now, so just to recap, we've agreed the minutes of the Monday the 9th of February, and the minute of the 29th of November is going to be recirculated so it can be formally agreed as well. And we'll take the formal agreement of that, hopefully, after the presentation from Horsecross. Is that agreeable?
Agreed.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so just quickly, Councillor Jarvis, I see you're having some problems.
It's okay. It seems to have resolved itself now. Everything was freezing and I could sort of do nothing, which is why I didn't declare an interest in Horsecross at the beginning of the meeting, but I think
Okay,
everything's
so-
okay now.
So you're declaring an interest, that's a declaration of interest in terms of your membership of the Horsecross board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Danny. If you can note that for the minute, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm very pleased today to welcome Nick Williams, Willie Anderson and Victoria Beasley from Horsecross to speak to us today. And Fiona Robertson is here from the Council Officers. Fiona, is there any introduction you wish to make?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, good morning, councillors. Apologies also from Colin Hood, the Chair of Horsecross, on annual leave this week. Councillors, you have 3 issues which Nick and his colleagues will take you through this morning, a couple of which arose from your discussions at Scrutiny last time. The first matter is the financial update on Horsecross, which is reported on a quarterly basis to Scrutiny, as you're all aware. The second item, which Nick and Vicky Beasley will talk you through, Horsecross's work on creative learning and how that's been reinstated post-pandemic. Very important contribution to the wider attainment and achievement of young people in particular, so we think it's helpful Scrutiny to hear more about that. Finally, Convener, there was discussion at the last Scrutiny Committee about investment in the council-owned venues which Horsecross operates on behalf of the council, the theatre and the concert hall. There were 2 elements to that, just to remind committee members. One is the building fabric of the theatre and the concert hall, which the council is responsible, and Stephen Crawford and his team from Property Services are attending committee this morning in case there are any questions that committee members would want to put to Stephen and his team. The other aspect to this is the equipment, the specialist performing arts equipment, which Horsecross are responsible, albeit supported by the council, and you may have questions for Nick and his Director of Finance, Willie Anderson. So that's all I wanted to say by way of intro. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Fiona. I just have to say, Fiona, it was quite difficult to hear, so are you in the chamber?
I am, Convener.
Yeah, it may just be perhaps for those of us more remotely, it might be just be mindful that sound isn't coming across as clearly as it normally would. So, but I did manage to catch everything you said. So thank you for that introduction. Well, in that case, then I would call on Nick Williams and welcome to the committee. Nick, are you here?
Yes, I am, Convener. Good morning.
Oh, hello, Nick. I can see you. Good morning. And Willie and Victoria, you both, can you see and hear us?
Yeah, can do both.
Perfect. Okay. So Nick, over to you then.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for Fiona's helpful précis of what we're going to talk about this morning. Can we pop up our slides, please? We might do this in a slightly different order to how Fiona presented it. So we'll start with the financial update as a regular presentation to committee, which Willie will give, and we'll lead on from there for a little bit further insight into the ongoing impact of COVID on our operation across both of the buildings. And then we'll talk a little bit about equipment and capital issues before handing over to Vicky for the more interesting bit, I dare say, about our programme, which she has been leading for coming up to 2 years now. So can we move on to slide 2, and I will hand to Willie to talk through the finances to start with.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Convener. Good morning, everyone. I think the first thing I would say is that in principle our forecast year-end position, all things considered, as broadly as we've been forecasting throughout the entire year. If we ignore for the time being 2 unique items which I'll talk about, we're basically on track to more or less meet our budget, which is, as you see from the slide there, a 50k surplus for the year. You will note, of course, that actually the surplus is suggested.
Excuse me, Willie, sorry, I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm finding it quite difficult to see that slide on my screen. Is there any way it can be expanded? Or is anybody else, is it just me, or is anybody else having the same issues?
Convener, I'm having the same issues as well. It's also not possible to read the numbers from the chamber here because it's only displaying on the very large screens.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's anything your technical individuals can do. We obviously passed them over a week ago.
If you tap on the table, it comes up in a much larger format, and if I can manage to do that, then I would respectfully suggest anybody can do it.
Convener, we'll also just email this slide to committee members. Ask a member of my team to do that.
Thank you, Fiona. That would be helpful. Thank you. Millie, if you want to continue, please.
Okay, yeah, will do. Okay, so just to clarify then, we've been looking at a 50k budgeted surplus for the year, and other than two factors at the end of the year, that's essentially where we were headed, which, bearing in mind the circumstances we've gone through, I think is a commendable achievement. The two numbers I will draw your attention to are, first of all, critical equipment replacement. We've talked at this committee at length on these two issues now about the lack of investment over a number of years that Horsecross has engaged in with regards to its equipment responsibilities, and that there was an overdue stack of equipment requirements in place. We've actually had to engage in some of that work, and Nick will talk a wee bit more about that in detail in future slides, but we've spent roughly 126k on critical equipment during the year. So that will actually show a reported deficit then, or a forecast reported deficit of in excess of 120k. The other unusual event that happened since last scrutiny is that we were successful in our bid to the Creative Scotland Cancellation Fund. This was to cover losses sustained around the Christmas and New Year period with the COVID shutdown that happened at that time. Surprisingly, from our perspective, we actually received the whole amount of our bid, and Nick again will talk a wee bit more about that in future slides, and that was 419k. Now again, by definition, it was for actual costs of cancellation, so on and so forth. The reality is that the bulk of this will be put into our reserves. So it looks like we are going to report a surplus of around about 296k. I think the caveat I would put in there is obviously the 419k that we received right at the year end, and even notwithstanding that, we had a further 400k of government support during the year. So from our perspective internally, we're very happy, both as a leadership team and the board, that we've met the target of a 50k surplus, but we have had to begin to replace the equipment. And I would say, you know, we're quite positive in our outlook going forward on that basis. Next slide, please. So, and this is the final one from me. Regardless of what now looks like a very positive surplus position, as I said earlier, the vast majority of that will go into creating a reserve, which we currently do not have and have never previously. So we're continuing to be prudent. That's worked for us and the new leadership team over the last 2 years, and we've reported on, I think, 8 different occasions since I've come in 2 years ago to this committee. The leadership team will continue to have a very much closer financial control than I think, you know, one would expect from an organisation of our size. Again, that stood us in good stead over the last 2 years, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet. And again, Nick will talk further about this in ensuing slides, that actually COVID still actually causes us a huge amount of issues in terms of show cancellations, and as I'm sure you're all experiencing, staff absence. That's the 2 slides from me, and I'm happy to answer any queries on those, or you may want to just continue with a more general update from Nick.
I'm happy to take questions in this section because it's quite discreet at this point. If anybody has any questions, can you please put Q in the chat box, please? I recognise that the slides have only just arrived in our inboxes, so it may well be that questions may come at a later point. If there are no questions for now, then we'll move on to the next part of the presentation. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Willie, for your input.
We move on to the next slide then, please. So, as Willie mentioned then, COVID has had an ongoing impact on us, and the Christmas restrictions have actually had a really long tail through all of Q4, with cancellation and postponement happening sort of all the way through to March. It is affecting touring activity quite extensively. Anyone who had tickets booked for a weekend in March a couple of weeks back, where we lost all of the programme in both venues because of COVID within the touring companies. Luckily, both of those shows have been rescheduled, so Pete and Beasley is happening this weekend coming, and the children's show that we had is coming back in October half term. But it is an ongoing issue, and something I think we will continue to face as we progress through the year. Willie also mentioned COVID amongst our staff, and you know, it feels very much like even those with both doses of the vaccine and a top-up are still getting it, myself included. And I guess it's one of those things we're seeing very broadly around us at the moment, although we are just about managing where we do have some of those instances where people are taken out of work. The legal restrictions have now ended, but we are maintaining some of them into the longer term to promote confidence amongst our audiences and artists. This would include maintaining face coverings for customer-facing staff and for backstage staff if at all it has requested it. And we're also maintaining the airflow management regime, which we've spoken of before at this committee, which pumps significant sums of fresh air into the auditoria to dispel any COVID that might be there. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So Willie spoke just now of the mitigation funding that we received from the Scottish Government via Creative Scotland to cover those losses from the Christmas period and the tail through Q4. We were extremely lucky to receive our full request from this fund because they had been managing expectations, shall we say, very heavily. And as a result, we were pleasantly surprised to receive our full ask rather than a reduction, which we were expecting. Additionally, there was a second fund announced at very short notice towards the end of the financial year, and this was called the Resilience Fund, and we received £242,000 from this. This again is designed to be held in reserve against the potential impact of COVID during this financial year, as I think it's unlikely that there is going to be any more funding available. So, as I say, that money will sit in our reserve and help us weather any further storms that might come our way as a result of the pandemic and as we move through this year. As Willie referenced, you know, this puts us in a much more confident position in terms of a viable reserve for an organisation of the size and scale of Horsecross. Let's move on to the next slide then and start to talk about equipment and property issues. We've previously spoken at this meeting of the backlog of equipment issues that we were facing. During Q4, we did have to respond to some of this because we were teetering on the brink of sort of operational viability issues caused by equipment failure. So as a result, we've upgraded the IT network in the concert hall, increasingly tours coming in, run all of their equipment through the IT network, and maintaining that stability is absolutely essential to keeping the shows going. We have also upgraded our till system across the bars. Those of you that might have been into the hall before Christmas might have seen some of the wobbles we were getting around tills and payment systems. Obviously, it's important to make sure that our customers have a good time, and for many that involves having a drink. And additionally, then we have upgraded some of the critical equipment in the Ganachie Auditorium itself. Some of this stuff was really very outdated and well beyond its planned lifespan, and so we have had to move quickly to secure that equipment to maintain our operation moving forward into this financial year. Let's move on to the next slide then, please. We are continuing to develop our priorities for equipment replacement. You know, I think we've previously said that we think there is a significant backlog, and we need to get into a cycle where we are replacing equipment when it needs to be replaced, and making sure that we are on top of that cycle. There are a number of funding sources that we are exploring, but they're not as abundant as they are for project works, unfortunately, but we will continue to explore what is available to us to help fund this sort of activity. We're also making sure that we build equipment upgrade and maintenance into our budgets so that we're able to respond if there is an emergency, and hopefully hit a cycle of planned upgrade and maintenance to ensure that we can keep the shows on the road and ensure that we are not at any unnecessary risk in terms of the potential for equipment failure affecting our core operation. In general, that does mean that we will have to generate surplus funds to pay for this and proactively manage our equipment replacement programme. We move on, and then we can talk a little about the buildings. So we work very, very closely with Property Services and Stephen Crawford's team to develop, you know, the management of the buildings and look at the areas that sit between both the council and Horsecross in terms of responsibility. Stephen and team have been started work on commissioning a building condition and decarbonisation survey, and this is to look at the concert hall especially, and to focus on how we might reduce the environmental impact that the building has. Obviously, coming up to 20 years, some of its systems are getting to that point where they will need replacement, but also we're really very focused on reducing our energy consumption. You will all be aware of the energy crisis that's happening in this country, and the costs of running a building that is very energy heavy, such as the concert hall, is absolutely essential. I mentioned some of the areas that sit between equipment and buildings in the concert hall, things like the flexible seating system in the Ganachie Auditorium, and some of the built-in specialist theatrical systems are going to be appraised as a part of the building survey, because obviously many of them are the original fittings that were put in when the concert hall was built almost 20 years ago. I would just add that you know, we know that buildings, when they come to a sort of a certain age, are very much in need of a bit of an upgrade, and it feels that the concert hall might be heading into that territory in the coming years. So it feels very positive that we've got a good conversation with Property Services about what that future might look like as we move forward through the next decade. Let's move on then just to the final slide. You know, we're in a much more stable position than I think we've been at any point in the last 2 years that I've been reporting to this committee. We have come out of the COVID situation in a better position than I think any of us had dared to hope. But of course, COVID continues to cause us issues and is likely to over the coming year, I would imagine, and possibly beyond. the equipment situation is very much an ongoing program, and as I said, you know, if we can get on top of it and move to a planned maintenance and renewal plan, then I would hope that it will minimise our risk throughout the programme. And then finally, we are working very closely with Stephen and team to focus especially on the concert hall, but also on the theatre, which, you know, as a historic building, will always have issues that need addressing. I'm very happy to answer any questions, as would Woody be, on any of the above.
Thank you, Nick. That's very helpful. There are some questions in the text box, but perhaps before I come to those, I have a question of my own. It's around the purchase of the equipment that you mentioned. I'm presuming that's the lighting systems.
Yes, that is lighting systems. It's some stage equipment and till systems as well.
Okay, and does that include, because a lot of lighting systems now, of course, are running IT systems, and is that fully integrated with the upgrade to the IT systems?
Yes, so the approach that we're taking is very much industry standard equipment, which works naturally with modern IT systems. So we shouldn't be faced with any peculiarities there in terms of new equipment. It should all work as we hope with the system that we've got in place now. It's been upgraded.
Okay, and so did that include a purchase of new control desks for lighting and sound possibly?
Purchased a new, yes, we have purchased a new control desk. I think we've mentioned before the critical state of the lighting control desk. We've purchased some lanterns as well, and other bits and pieces of control equipment. You know, I did hold back from giving you the full shopping list because I'm not sure even I understand it in its entirety. But our technical team have worked through a proper sort of prioritization process to make sure that it's the things that we absolutely need at this point in time.
Yes, I probably would agree with you, Nick, that probably most people aren't that interested. It's just a previous life I had interest in that particular area myself. My final question really is, when you say purchase, does that mean purchase outright, or did you lease or rent, or a mixture?
We have purchased outright. Our board looked at the different options and decided it was more prudent to purchase outright at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you everybody else for your forbearance while I ask some of these little niche questions. Councillor Wilson, you have two questions you wish to ask.
Thanks, Convener. And first of all, if I can just say congratulations to the whole team on the very excellent Ukraine charity concert last week. It was an absolute gem, and well done. Question one, you've mentioned the purchase of equipment, Nick. Is it available, and can you get it in time if there are emergencies, given the amount of shortages there are with everything from light bulbs to semiconductors? That's my first question.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that was pressing very heavily on my thoughts. When we started the procurement process, we very much spoke to the potential suppliers about availability of equipment. Most of it was stuff that is in stock. As I said, this is industry standard equipment and the sort of thing that's very readily used. There are, I think, a small number of sound related items that have a longer lead time, but the supplier has offered us loan equipment until our own equipment actually arrives. So we're covered in terms of the equipment that we need, and the gap has been covered by a loaning out of stuff from the company, which is not an unusual practice actually in the performing arts.
Okay, thank you. Second one is about audiences. We've been to a number of shows recently, and some of them were very well attended, others less so. For instance, Piano Sundays, where the audience was thinner than you or I would have liked, I think. What actions are you taking to reintroduce or encourage folk to come back again, given that we've most of the restrictions are over, but there is still a lot of hesitancy about about being in crowded spaces amongst certain members of the population.
In terms of audiences, obviously there will be peaks and troughs of that, and as you mentioned, the Ukraine concert was sold out on Wednesday night, and we have a number of other shows that are very heavily sold. In terms of those that are not doing as well, I think based on the sort of the models, some of them are designed to have a fairly average attendance rate. We are in the process of evolving our marketing activities, which I think I've mentioned previously, very much drawing on the data that we have about our audiences and talking to them. I think in terms of reticence of audiences, we continue to highlight what we are doing. As I mentioned, we are continuing a number of COVID mitigation measures in our buildings with the express desire to help people feel safe and to feel confident in coming back. I do think that the general narrative around cost of living is perhaps contributing to hesitancy, although I can't give you detail of that at this stage because it's just not simply showing in the data in quite the way you might imagine. I do think that there has been hesitancy all along since we reopened in September, and I think some people are still uncomfortable. And I suppose the best thing we can do is highlight what we are doing to help people feel safe and comfortable and to encourage them to return. But obviously people make that as an individual decision and choice depending on their own circumstance. But as I said, we are continuing to target audiences and to talk to them about what it is that we're doing and to encourage them to return if they haven't yet.
Thank you very much for both full responses. I'm much obliged.
Thank you, Willie, and thank you, Nick. Councillor Chris Ahern, you have a question next, please.
Yes, thank you, convener. Mine's going back to the equipment replacement, and I don't think it's been answered. You mentioned there that you're going to go into a maintenance and renewal cycle for equipment. And part of why was it at such a critical point that you said it nearly had an impact on the performance? And I suppose the three parts is, was there an indication of a possible failure that led it to be at a critical point? Was there any opportunity to replace equipment at an earlier point? And if it is so critical, the IT equipment is so critical, are you going to build a system with a redundancy in? I did for a small time work in amateur dramatics in backstage, and we did have a dual system where, because it's so critical with lighting and everything else that goes through the IT system, that we actually had a redundant system that we could swap over to if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. As you'll be aware, the organisation has had its financial challenges predating the pandemic, and that's really the reason why there wasn't an ongoing equipment and renewal plan in place. So with the pandemic happening and being closed for 2 years again, things move on, it gets older, and the equipment that we have is heavily used as well. So it will perhaps have its lifespan sort of slightly curtailed because of its level of use. I think we were seeing indications of failure and we're taking mitigating strategies at all stages. We hadn't had the opportunity to replace anything really until this point, both on financial grounds and on operational grounds. Obviously, having been closed for 18 months, it does actually take quite a lot to get the buildings back and reopened and running again. So I think this is the earliest opportunity that we could have had to invest in the equipment and to meet some of those critical needs. There are redundancy systems built in. That's absolutely a part of the sort of standard process, but I think it would not have been a viable ongoing operation if we had to rely on those systems with increasing frequency. So really I think we've done it in the most timely way we could have, and at a point of affordability that we haven't been able to do it prior to now. But it is really a part of the history of the organisation that it's got to this stage, unfortunately, but one which we are very much turning around now.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, apologies, I put myself on mute there. Thank you both. And Councillor Fiona Robertson, did you want to come in on this point?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Convener. Just briefly to summarise what Nick has said, I mean, candidly, the organisation was not in a position to fund some of these pieces of equipment laterally for reasons that the committee understands. In recent years, it's been very preoccupied with its revenue position. We are, on the officer side, very happy to see Nick and his colleagues taking a more, and indeed the board, who I know had a strategic discussion about this at its last meeting, to thinking about planned investment in this very specialist equipment, just to emphasise and assure the committee that the council has stepped in over the years, particularly with the concert hall. The theatre is obviously a newer building and the equipment there is still pretty new, but the council has stepped in to invest in equipment to make sure that the reputation and profile of both these venues is well maintained at a national and a UK level, so that the concert hall in particular continues to receive very high quality acts. These pieces of equipment are difficult to fundraise for, which Nick is, tactfully alluding to. Creative Scotland does not offer a capital fund, and that is a challenge for local authorities and cultural trusts like Horsecross. But the key thing is that there's now a more planned approach and a better understanding of the priorities for investment in the future. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Fiona. That was helpful. Does that help, Chris?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I'm happy with what I've heard there for the approach moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now, Councillor Illingworth, Councillor David Illingworth, you have a question?
Thank you, Convener. A quick question. I'm slightly surprised that a building that is less than 20 years old, the concert hall, requires upgrading. Can you give us a little bit more detail on what the reasons are for that?
Nick, is that for you or for Stephen Crawford, or both?
I think this might need to be a bit of a double act, really. It's certainly from my perspective, there is a planned lifespan of a lot of the equipment and plant that's in the building, and obviously a building that has such heavy use as the concert hall, sort of welcoming over 100,000 people a year, it takes its toll on the building, and so it would always need a level of refurbishment after 20 odd years. But I think Stephen probably has a more detailed answer on that front.
Yes, Stephen's come forward to answer. So Stephen.
Yes, thank you for that. I really just add to what Nick has said. The building was opened in 2004. It is a highly complicated building, and if I was to look at our whole portfolio, it is one of the most complicated. It's now 18 years old. We have, over that time, I mean, it's certainly my time in the council, we've spent hundreds of £1,000s on certain parts of the council hall. Upgrading the sound system was nearly £500,000 about 5 or 6 years ago. And ongoing, we have just commissioned, or are in the process of commissioning, an independent condition survey, looking at the condition of the building and the equipment, looking at what options we have as a council for looking at transitioning the building across to low carbon. You'll note in the presentation on the budget there was a £200,000 utilities cost between the theatre and the concert hall, and then looking at how, and there is a big question of how improvements like this are implemented in such a live building that's open 7 days a week in the middle of Perth. So phasing any improvements or any funding is as much a challenge as getting the funding in the first place.
Thank you, Stephen. David, does that answer your question, or have you any supplementary questions?
Yep, that's very, very helpful. It is a beautiful, beautiful building and a fantastic experience in there. And thank you very much for this very useful information.
Thank you. Are there any other questions then on this particular part of the presentation from Horsecross? I don't see anything in the chat. From my own point of view, I just think it's very welcome to see that there's now a bit of a planned approach to these things that wasn't there before. So I just want to thank everybody for that work. There's a lot been achieved over the past few years despite the pandemic conditions that we all had to live through. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Stephen, for contributing to that too. So Nick, are we ready now to move on to the next part of the presentation from Victoria?
Terrific, thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to introduce you to Victoria Beasley, who is our Associate Director for Learning and Engagement, and she will talk to you about that programme of activity and how it has evolved post-pandemic. Vicky, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start off by just very briefly outlining the kind of 5 key principles that are guiding our work at the moment, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more detail about the work that we're doing. So the things that we're really thinking about at the moment are reducing barriers to accessing theatre and music, working in partnership with community organisations and other cultural organisations, reaching people across Perth and Kinross with our work, so that involves going out to people as well as expecting people to come into our venues. Working longer term with people to facilitate ongoing, more meaningful relationships rather than kind of popping in and out of people's lives. And thinking about the idea of co-creation. So working collaboratively with the people who engage with our workshop programme and bringing them together with artists to collaborate together. So there are principles and kind of here's how they're influencing our project. If we go on to the next slide, thank you. So focusing first of all on the regular workshop programme that we run in the concert hall and the theatre. When we began in-person workshops again in the autumn for our youth theatre and our Glee, which is a singing project for 5 to 18-year-olds, we introduced a £1 bursary option. So we know that 22% of children in Perth and Kinross are living in poverty. We know that the pandemic exacerbated the financial circumstances of a lot of families. And now with cost of living being a real issue, we think it's more important than ever to remove a potential financial barrier to participating in this work. We didn't want there to be any poverty shaming in people accessing this bursary. We didn't want them to have to ask for it and prove that they deserve it. So actually it's available at the point of purchase. So people can either pay the full price when they sign up to workshops, or they can pay a £1 bursary price. And there is then an option to make a donation. So if people want to contribute something in between those two prices, they can do that. And last term we had 30 young people who were on our bursary. Our youth theatre Mainstage production. So for the first time in 8 years, in March, our youth theatre performed a full production on our main stage, and that was called Chaos. It was a production that was created in response to a consultation that we did with our youth theatre last year. So they told us that they wanted to work on a script. They told us that they wanted to rehearse like a professional company would rehearse. And so that's what they did. And between October and March, they were in every weekend rehearsing. Their ideas and their creativity were at the heart of that final performance. It was a production that was delivered with full production values. They had the full support of our technical and production teams. They worked with a professional director and designers. It was marketed as part of our main season of work. And it was a really brilliant show that really deserved its space on our main stage. And what was lovely is that a number of the cast who performed in that show are coming back to do our summer production, which also has a community cast, which I shall tell you about shortly. So that's kind of putting the work of our young people at the heart of what we do, really profiling their ideas, their creativity, and giving value to the creative contributions that they make. And the last thing I'm going to tell you about in our regular workshop programme is a couple of partnership choirs that we're running at the moment. So we're working with Tayside Healthcare Arts Trust to run a choir called Vocal Cord, which is for adults with long-term and chronic health conditions. And we're also working with the PCAVS Carers Hub to run a choir for carers and the people that they care for. And the idea in delivering these projects in partnerships means that we bring our expertise, how we can use music and singing for well-being, how we can build confidence, how we can develop a sense of how important your voice is. And the partners bring their expertise, so a specific knowledge that's required to support these individuals and bringing this existing community of people together and into our buildings, kind of again breaking down barriers to accessing the work that we do. Next slide, please. So our outreach programme, we're thinking a lot more about going out of our buildings a little bit to reach more people across Perth and Kinross, but also then how we bring new people into the buildings as well. So Gig on a Truck, this is our award-winning pop-up stage that kind of tours around Perth and Kinross. And it has previously visited care homes, it's visited schools, it's visited community venues and community events. Between April and October last year, we visited 60 sites across Perth and Kinross, including Cooper Angus, Kirkmichael, Kinross, Kenmore, Moothall, Crieff, Octorada, Perth, and many other places, trying to get a really nice spread across the whole of the area. And we're planning on taking Gig on a Truck out again this year, kind of building on that previous experience and working with the communities that we're going to programme what goes on there and to work in a way that is beneficial to them, as well as enabling us to take our work to more people. We have 2 associate artists working with us at the moment in partnership with 2 other organisations. So we have been working with Mindspace and ESOL Perth for the last year. Again, working in this longer term way gives us the opportunity to gain trust, to develop relationships, and to provide a really quality experience for the people participating in these projects. So with Mindspace, we have a writer on attachment with them, and she is exploring writing for well-being and for mental health. This project was so popular that we had to add a second group to it. So we now work with about 30 people with this group, and we've just secured a second year of funding to deliver this project. And it's having a really beneficial impact on the people participating who feel that their voices are really valued in that workshop. We're also working with ESOL Perth, the English Language Centre, and we have a theatre director on attachment there, and she is using exercises and training that we use in theatre for voice work with actors to work with people who have migrated to Perth for different reasons, some refugees, some asylum seekers, and some who have migrated for work and other reasons. And we're using this voice work to grow confidence and to grow that sense of ownership of English for these people. They had a little film sharing in the concert hall earlier this year of some poetry that they had learnt to read that was really beautiful. And again, we're planning on extending that project later in the year, because again, it seems to be having a really positive impact on the people involved. So partnership work in here has been really important. It's meant that we can reduce the barriers to accessing our work for the people in these projects, because they feel really well supported by the partner organisations and ourselves working together. And then Oh When the Saints. So this is a project that we've been working on for over a year now. When the theatre was closed, we began discussion events online called Team Talk. So Saints fans zoomed in and discussions were led by well-known Sainties, and people shared stories of what it was to be a Saints fan. And then when in-person became a possibility, we ran some in-person Team Talk events where well-known Sainties were in conversation with Stuart Cosgrove. And then fans in the audience shared their own personal stories, personal memories of being a Saints fan, asked questions. And from these discussion events, the script has been created now. And what is lovely about that is that that means that the script really feels like it belongs to the people of Perth and Kinross. It has come directly from them. And in the summer, we will have the performance that has a small professional cast, but we'll also have a community cast of 40 people, half of whom are big St Johnstone fans. And it's really exciting to see where that project's going to take us. Next slide, please. So the final strand of work that we're focusing on at the moment is schools and nurseries work. So we've restructured our department a little bit. So we now have a schools creative coordinator, so somebody who can focus specifically on this strand of work. The photograph that you can see there is from a project called We Are Mighty. So we worked with the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow and the National Theatre of Scotland, and Good Chance Calais, which is the theatre company who created this puppet, who's called Little Amal. And Little Amal had walked from the border of Turkey and Syria all the way across Europe to Manchester, and then she came up to Glasgow for COP26. And she is a Syrian refugee. And the project explored migration, it explored forced migration, and it explored climate change and climate justice. And we had children from Grantley and Comrie primary schools travelling to Glasgow to be at this event with Little Amal. Another project that we're currently working on at the moment is the Harmony Project. What's lovely about this project is it's kind of emerged from relationships that we formed with care homes through Gig on a Truck. So we are working with 3 primary schools, Cleash, Milnathort and Guildtown Primary, and 3 care homes and residential homes, Causeway Court, Ashley House and the Royal Douglas Memorial Home. And each primary school is paired with a care home and a musician and a drama facilitator, and they are going to discover, care home residents are going to share stories and memories that the children in the primary schools are then going to use to write a song, and then the primary school children will then go and perform a song for the care home residents, and those songs will be recorded. And I guess the idea of that is kind of reconnecting communities a little bit after the pandemic, where people have been isolated, and kind of finding ways of working intergenerationally with that. We're in the planning phase of a project with Fairview School as well. So over the course of 2022-23 academic year, we're going to put 2 experienced musicians and 2 emerging musicians in residence at Fairview. The idea is that they'll then get to work with a group of pupils there for the slightly longer term over the course of the year. It reduces barriers to participation so that children with additional support needs have the opportunity to make music, and we'll be working in partnership with Fairview using their expertise as well as our expertise. And so the pupils there will get the chance to explore their own creativity and to co-create music with professional musicians. And then the final project I'm going to tell you about is We Are Tiger. So this is linked to our upcoming production of I Am Tiger, which is about a girl whose brother takes his own life, and her parents buy her a tiger to help her cope with the situation. And you can imagine what happens as a result of that. But these workshops explore creative writing as a tool for well-being. So far we've taken them into Ochterada and Blairgowrie secondary schools, and we've also been to the YMCA Youth Voice Conference, which happened during the Easter holidays. We've also worked very closely with the Lighthouse for Perth in developing the workshops that happen around this, and have had training for our learning and engagement team as well as our visitor experience team in suicide awareness and prevention, just so that we can be prepared to support anybody who comes in and sees the show. So with our schools work at the moment, over the past year we've worked with 35 primary schools, so kind of just over half of the primary schools in Perth and Kinross, and 5 secondary schools, which I think is about 40% of schools. Next slide, please. So just a few quotes to finish up with. So this is a Courier review of Chaos, which was the Youth Theatre Mainstage production. Here was efficiency in the midst of chaos, rapid fire oral gymnastics and not a line missed. The young cast succeeded admirably in eliciting many an emotion, empathy, sympathy, fear, frustration, and yes, much humour. So it was a beautiful show. This from a Mindspace participant who's taking part in the creative writing for wellbeing workshops. I feel supported, unjudged, and my story is accepted and validated by others. This is something social, time for just me to express myself, that gives me a break away from full-time caring. And then a quote from a Little Stars nursery teacher. So these are our creative play workshops that happen in nurseries for 3 to 5 year olds. The children are far more open in their thinking as a result of the programme and have found many more ways to explore their creativity. The team helped the children to further develop their confidence and self-esteem. They also supported them with the idea that being creative is a very individual thing. Everyone's ideas and creative side is important and unique to them. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Victoria. That was very interesting and very uplifting. I don't see any questions. Oh, I do see questions down the chat box, so I shall go to questions from members first, then I have one of my own later. So, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, convener. That was very, very uplifting indeed. I understand, and I've attended some of the Gig in the Truck events. They've been extremely successful in outlying areas, and I just really wondered, following their success, if we enthuse young people to be more creative and want to join in the work of the theatre, how can we ensure that we can get them from the outlying areas into Perth to participate? In some respects, it's easier taking a truck out to Meagle than it is to get kids from Meagle in and out to Perth, given there is no meaningful public transport. Do we have any plans to assist with any people that we pick up on our way around the countryside to ensure they can get in and out, more importantly, back out home again from the centre to participate?
Yeah, yes, so this is something we're trying to get our heads around still, to be perfectly honest. So we have got, from Organic funding, we have got the possibility of some travel bursaries. Obviously, now that young people can get free public transport, that's helpful for some young people who live near better public transport links, but for others it's still a challenge. So for our St Johnston show in the summer, we're planning on putting on buses that can bring people to and from the theatre, and I think that'll be a really good exploration, and it will help us kind of understand how that works a little bit better, and what we take from that and we learn from that. We can then think about how we spread that more widely, and what is useful to do after that. Yeah, it is still a work in progress in kind of and it's also for us about prioritising what it is that we want to do and what we are capable of, and that we can't necessarily solve all of the problems, but we're focusing on reaching as many people as we can.
Thank you, Victoria. Does that answer your question, Councillor Simpson?
That's very reassuring, thank you, convener. It's always been an issue. I was involved with Perth City Singers and PYO when my daughter was younger, and it seemed that stars always lived in the furthest reaches of Perth and Kinross. But I think it's very important we address this, and I'm happy that that's being done.
Thank you both. Victoria, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It's very, very, as I said already, very uplifting and encouraging. I wanted to ask specifically, and also I want to commend you on the work you're doing in terms of working with other organisations such as Lighthouse for Perth and ESOL. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the residency at Fairview. Fairview, of course, is in my ward. In fact, in Councillor Wilson's ward, we know it quite well, and I have had the privilege of being able to see around there and see their music facility. Is it just music that you're offering there, or is it will be drama as well?
Yeah, so the funding that we have is specifically for music, but I think what we are very aware of is that kind of to make this as accessible for the pupils there as possible, it has to be multi-art form. So we've had discussions there with the teachers about what happens in between the musicians being there and how can the teachers use different art forms to kind of facilitate engagement with the music making. So our musicians will be really focused on music making, but working with the school, there will be other art forms drawn on in that project.
Thank you. That is very reassuring. And I think as an extension to that, I mean, Fairview obviously serves the whole of Perth and Kinross, but it has limited numbers of spaces, and a number of particularly younger children are educated either at home or closer to where they live. And most of our schools have some facilities available for children who do have additional support needs. So I'm wondering if this is a Fairview discrete programme, or whether or not there's opportunities to then extend that out into other schools and to other children who may not be in a mainstream school situation.
Yeah. So this particular project is specifically for Fairview, and I think what will be great is with the expertise of the staff at Fairview is that we can really extend our learning and then think in subsequent years, how do we take what we learned at Fairview and share that more widely. So I think there's definitely a possibility of doing that. We have our Let's Dance accessible dance workshops, that are open for anybody across Perth and Kinross to come to. And we are having lots of conversations about how the work that we do isn't just for the SEN departments within schools can also find the work that we do accessible. So when children come to see concerts, for example, our schools concerts are very popular with primary schools. We're going to be adding a breakout room so that children with additional support needs can still experience the concert. There'll be a relay, but there is this other space for them to feel a bit freer in and not have to necessarily sit still and watch a concert in and behave in a particular way. So we're thinking about broadening the accessibility across our programme for children in mainstream education.
Thank you very much. And that kind of lends itself to a secondary question, I think, perhaps for Stephen, and perhaps Nick, when we're looking at upgrading and refreshing our venues, that we do. Do we have plans to have particular spaces that are for attendees who have particular support needs, particularly around noise and sensory spaces? Is there, what are the plans around those?
At the moment, as Vicky said, we sort of use some of the space we already have. So when we do our performances, the panto performances especially, we use the Joe Knight studio as a breakout space or the space, so that there are those spaces. But at present, I'm not sure we have anywhere we could use on a permanent basis. But I think as we develop our approach to making our work as broadly accessible to anyone who wants to come, it's all things to consider and to put into the planning. Of course, the physical buildings are physically accessible in that the concert hall is all flat floor on the ground floor, and we have the lifts, and the theatre has lift access to all of its public levels, and additional wheelchair spaces as well, as things like assisted listening and that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Stephen, you wanted to make a comment? Or?
It was just a general comment that in anything we do across our entire portfolio, we endeavour to improve the equalities aspects of it. There's a capital budget for that, and it's part of any design process that we do. And dare I say, if there's bigger works that require warrants, that's a fundamental part of the request from the new building standards.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat box. So if there is nothing more to be contributed from members, I'd just like to thank Nick. Oops, he's just come up here. Sorry, it's a different question. I'd like to thank Nick, Willie and Victoria for your attendance here today and your presentation, which is very informative. And also over the years, I know not all of you have been here since this council term, but I do think that generally there's a marked improvement in both the content and the direction of travel for Horsecross, certainly before this committee. So thank you all for your hard work. It's really appreciated, and good luck for the summer season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, convener. Thank you, councillors.
Now, for committee members, I sent a message out earlier on that the addendum to the minute of the 29th of November should now be in your inbox. I think I would like to call a quick 10-minute recess to allow you some time to familiarise yourself with that again, and then we'll return at 10:55, and that will be the first item in the agenda to formally accept, hopefully, that minute of the 29th of November. So we'll recess for 10 minutes, and then I'll see you in 5 to 11. Thank you, everyone. Hello everyone, are we all back in the room now? Okay, if everyone is in attendance, then we'll move on. The minutes of the 29th of November have now been circulated, and elected members hopefully have had a chance to look at those. So I would like to go back to that agenda item next, and I note that there is a comment from Councillor Stewart on that minute. Would you perhaps, Councillor Stewart, perhaps like to share that with us?
Rena?
Yes?
We're not all back in the chamber yet.
Oh, are we not?
No.
Okay.
Somebody's going to
Who's
chip
missing?
them up. But certainly Councillor Bailey is, and a couple of the officers who are attending.
Councillor Parrott, is everyone back in the chamber now?
Rena, everyone is now just back in.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I would like to, as I mentioned earlier on in the meeting, I would like to go back to the minute of the 29th of November 2021 that has now been circulated to elected members for acceptance. I note that Councillor Stewart has emailed a comment. So Councillor Stewart, for completeness and for the public record, could you please share that comment with the committee?
Yes, thanks, Convener. It was just to say that under the point on item 7, it was requested that the Chief Executive Correspondence and the Memorandum of Understanding be circulated, an addition there, and then at the end, just all in line with commitments given at the meeting. It wasn't, it wasn't my request. I did go back and check the record, and those commitments were made at the meeting. So it was just to clarify those 2 points.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think that's clear. Danny, can we please ensure that those comments are included in the minute, in the addendum if necessary, and subject to those being included, can we now accept the minute of the 29th of November?
Agreed.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience in this matter. Now we move on to item 5 in the agenda, which is the summary report on the Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland inspections. And can I call on Sheena Devlin to introduce that report, please?
Good morning, Convener. Sharon Johnson is going to introduce this paper, if that's acceptable to yourself.
Perfectly fine, Sheena. Thank you very much, Sharon.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, councillors. I'd like to introduce this report, which provides an overview of the performance of education and children's services, which have been inspected and reported on over the past 2 years by the Care Inspectorate and by Education Scotland since the previous report of this type, which was presented to Scrutiny Committee in 2020. It also sets out the service's approach to implementing improvement actions arising out of inspection. So section 1 of this report details the various types of inspections carried out in regulated care services and schools by both the Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland. However, due to the COVID pandemic, both Education Scotland and the Care Inspectorate have changed their usual scrutiny arrangements from March 2020 and undertook a range of different types of engagement with services. The Care Inspectorate continued to visit regulated settings and did inspect, and they inspected under a different model called Key Question 5, which was looking at the measures taken by settings in response to COVID, as well as conducting their more usual unannounced visits during 2021 and 2022. Education Scotland paused all normal inspection activity in March 2020, but did conduct follow-through recovery visits from September to December 2021, and they also conducted a number of thematic inspections, which Perth Kinross settings took part in. They are currently undertaking a number of recovery visits in ELC settings and schools across the country, where they will engage with pupils, staff and parents and listen to how schools have responded to the challenges of the pandemic whilst keeping continuity of learning and teaching. These visits are voluntary, and we have a range of ELC settings and schools in Perth and Kinross who have volunteered to take part. Section 4.7 of this report summarises the planning taken by ECS to ensure continuous improvement while all of those different inspection activities were underway. And appendices A to E provides an overview of performance across all of our services over time and against national data and comparator authorities. Committee should note that overall it represents a strong performance over time and some good improvements made to some of the slight dips in performance we saw in ELC over the past 2 years in the light of 1140 hours. So service managers and myself are in attendance to answer any questions that you may have on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Are there any questions or comments on the report, please? I'll take questions first. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Sharon. And I recognise, you know, what you've been saying about the changes in inspection, and we've seen that results across the board. But just looking at Appendix B, I just wondered if you could say a little bit about quality of an environment and quality of leadership and management, and the things that have already been put in place and will be put in place, just to bring that up a little bit. You know, I understand what you're saying about the changes with the Care Inspectorate, and that's affected, you know, it's almost getting harder and harder to get those sort of very good and better, but obviously that's what we're always striving for. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit around that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Sarwar. Absolutely, and that there are probably two main reasons for the changes in those gradings. One is the increased expectations of the Care Inspectorate in relation to all of the quality indicators and the changes to that. And for some of our partner providers in particular, the quality of environment became quite challenging, because we do have some partner providers who are quite small, and some of whom operate from houses, in fact. And we really did need to put in a bit of effort from our early years team to make sure that those quality of environments were improved. And in relation to a comment earlier on with the Horse Cross discussions around changing the environments to be more accessible, we have invested quite a bit of time and effort into looking at making sure that the environments are suitable for young children with additional support needs as well. So that work has been undertaken over the past 2 years, and you will see from later on in the report that our quality gradings for the quality of environment have steadily improved and are back to beyond pre-pandemic levels. In relation to quality of leadership and management, that's also the case, increased expectations. But of course, with the rise and the increase in 1140 hours of early learning and childcare over the past 5 years, we've invested quite heavily in our leadership and management, because we've had to almost double our staffing elements. And I would like to just pass over to Bernadette Scott to talk a little bit about the significant improvements we've made to leadership and management within PKC, if that's okay.
It's fine, thank you, Bernadette.
Thank you, Sharon.
just to add to what Sharon has already said, we have put a significant amount of effort and commitment into our leadership and management. So we have a new induction programme for all staff, no matter what level they come into ELC. As Sharon said, we've almost doubled the workforce there. But specifically around about management and leadership, we have developed a new programme with a leadership consultant, and we're on our second cohort of attendees actually, where there's a 6-day programme where we really focus in on all of the different elements that come along with leading and being responsible for a nursery, which is quite different. And we take the participants through that, and we are seeing that that is really making a difference to those who have responsibility for leading and managing our settings. In addition to that, we've also developed what we call a self-evaluation toolkit, and that has been shared widely with all leaders and managers, but actually all practitioners too, because it's everybody's responsibility to ensure improvement in the setting. And as well as that, to add to the environment information that Sharon shared, we've recently developed another toolkit, if you like, called Developing Quality Experience in Spaces. And that's recently been launched with all of our settings, and it's a really useful tool that takes all staff through what a really good one looks like and what are the resources and the experiences that we would want for the children of Perth and Kinross. So there's quite a lot that's been in train for some time, and we're beginning to see the benefits of that now.
Thank
you,
you,
Bernadette. Does that answer your question, Councillor Sarwar?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, you have a question?
Convener, thank you. We've seen in the report that there have been changes both in the Education Scotland approach and the Care Inspectorate approach. We expect that, and sometimes we know these in advance and sometimes we don't. However, have these, is it the opinion of our senior officers that these changes will help in the improvement process of what we do? Because the whole purpose of this exercise of inspection is to help support the work that we're doing. It's not coming in to be critical, it's to be there to make an assessment of how we're doing and how it can be a process of continuous improvement. Do you think these changes are going to help us to carry on that programme of continuous improvement?
I'm happy to answer that one, Convener, if that's all right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. There have been quite a number of changes, and the main changes that have been implemented so far have been through the Care Inspectorate, and they have implemented a number of changes, including changing the quality indicators and the National Care Standard, and also the different types of inspection through COVID. So to answer your question about are the changes improvements, I think they are. I think we all have ambition for continuous improvement within all of our ELC settings and our schools, and so therefore we share the ambition of the scrutiny bodies to make that ever more challenging and ambitious for our children. I think the other change that's been an improvement is that while inspection activity was paused, there were different ways of engaging with both Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland and local authority officers, and that has really helped, I think, to gain a better perspective and understanding of the impacts of COVID. And I do think that these recovery inspection visits, where Education Scotland are going out and talking to pupils, to parents, to staff, and to young people about what it's been like over the past 2 years, I think will help their understanding tremendously when they move into scrutiny in August. And certainly their engagement with local authority officers, I think, has been incredibly beneficial. Thank you.
As ever, thank you very much indeed for that full reply.
Thank you, Sharon. Is there any other questions? My chat seems to be a little bit slow, so if anybody's put something in the chat and I've not seen it, can you please raise your hand or call my attention to it? I don't see anything else. Okay, then I'll assume that's all the questions. Are there any comments? No, there don't seem to be any comments either. Well, in that
Sorry,
case then,
Convener. I just
Fiona?
sorry, the delay.
Yes.
If I may, yeah, just because I know that I won't be at the exec subcommittee when this is coming up in a few weeks, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed my time on that exec subcommittee, and wanted to thank all the officers for the effort and input that they put into that. But just to flag up, within this report, Woodley Cottage, which has consistently had very, very high standards and an outstanding level of care provided to the young people that use that service. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the staff, and if that could be passed on, that you know, it's really something that we should be immensely proud of at Perth and Kinross, and the work that is done there is not unnoticed, and just to say well done again for another good report from them.
Thank you, Fiona. And Councillor Illingworth, you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Convener. Yep, I'd like to agree with Councillor Sarwar. This is an excellent report. Like Councillor Sarwar, I was slightly concerned to see a dip in leadership and management scores, but glad to hear that it's been addressed effectively. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. And Councillor Wilson, you wish to make a comment?
Thanks, Convener. Well, this will be the last opportunity I have to make comment on this type of report as well. And I just want to place on record warm thanks to all the officers who've contributed to making a real programme of improvement in what we do. And I mentioned deliberately, Convener, the term continuous improvement, because this is an iterative process of learning for the educators as well as the educated. And I think we're well led in ECS terms in Perth and Kinross Council, and I think that we have a degree of, I would call it, self-criticism and self-evaluation that is actually being copied by quite a lot of other local authorities in Scotland. Now, nothing is perfect, and one of the ways of knowing that you're going to try and do well is knowing that you're never perfect and you want to make things continuously better. But I think in the period of challenge that there has been with all the changes, the COVID and all the other issues that we have, both as a society and a local authority, I think our staff have done exceptionally well, and they deserve our warm thanks and our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I would agree with those comments, you know, to the staff, and I think they do a fantastic job. Okay, so I think now there are no more comments in the chat, so that leaves me to thank Sheena, Sharon and everyone at the Education Service for this report and for their attendance here today and at previous meetings. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to the next item in the agenda, which is the Local Government Benchmarking Framework, and I think is Charlene Guild is going to introduce this.
That's right, Convener, thank you and good morning. I'm very pleased to present our Local Government Benchmarking Framework report today. The report presents a summary of Perth and Kinross Council's performance during 2020-21 against the Local Government Benchmarking Framework indicators, which are published by the Improvement Service and in March 2022, and they represent the first year of the Local Government Benchmarking Framework data impacted by the pandemic. All of the data is displayed on the Improvement in Service Toolkit, which is on their website. This is further embedded on our PKC website. However, for ease of reference, there is a link to this information within the report. And the report would normally provide some analysis in the overview and covering report over a one-year period, providing comparison to the previous year. This year, however, in recognition of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on the data within 2021, comparative information on indicators to the previous year have not been provided. Instead, performance information has been compared against Scottish averages, and we have added in the family group averages and data ranges to give additional context for each indicator. This is in a year where making comparisons should be treated with caution, and it's the same approach we agreed for our 2021 annual performance report. There are two new indicators being reported upon this year, one in relation to the gross value add per capita and one examining the percentage of children living in poverty. A number of children's services indicators are still unavailable from the LGBF toolkit for all councils, and these will be published by the Improvement Service after data is refreshed in May 2022. Finally, we've again improved the format and accessibility of the report. This is through standardisation of coloured coding, using graphics and plain English. I would now welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you, Charlene, and I'm sure people have heard me saying this before, graphics and plain English is always very welcome in terms of the visuals. We do have some questions in the chat. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to all those who have brought forward this comprehensive report. My question is about the indicators on page 43 of our pack. While most indicators contained in the report are above the Scottish average, I'm concerned that pupils from deprived areas percentage points are below average in all quintile, a point which is noted in the report. To those watching and listening in the meeting, can you give a brief explanation of what SIMD quintile means, and also what measures have you or will you be putting in place in order to close the attainment gap? Thank you.
Caroline, do you want to take that? Or
I'm just wondering if one of my colleagues from the Education Service, I see Sharon's there, I'm wondering if Sharon could answer that.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you very much, Charlene. Thank you, Convener. Councillor Massey, in relation to the indicators, you're absolutely right. So to answer your question about SIMD, SIMD is the Scottish Government's standard approach to identify areas of multiple deprivation in Scotland, and that's what these measures where we are falling short of our performance relate to. And SIMD is used to measure deprivation and look at understanding the outcomes and circumstances of people living in the most deprived areas. It's split up into quintiles, and the most deprived area is in quintile 1, and so therefore it's those lowest areas of, or those highest areas of deprivation where Perth and Kinross need to improve. The impact of deprivation has long been known to have a major impact on attainment within education, and indeed that is what the National Improvement Framework recognises in terms of its ambition to improve excellence and equity across the piece. And the impact of COVID and indeed the increase in poverty levels has meant that this is an ever-increasing challenge for all local authorities. As can be seen from all of the indicators, Perth and Kinross have had a steadily improving picture of attainment over the piece, and the latest benchmarking figures for broad general education and in senior phase show that Perth and Kinross has actually improved its levels of attainment, even for those deprived areas through COVID, which is pleasing. But as you can see from the figures, there's an awful lot to do. Just to give a brief overall answer to what is it we're doing in relation to that, we have an education plan which has an absolute key focus on inclusive practice, and that education plan is a 3 to 5 year plan because we know that this is not going to change overnight. We have a much clearer set of measures and data and targeting our resources to those most in need. We have a set of interventions to target health and well-being and core aspects of literacy and numeracy. We have strengthened our Raising Attainment Board and linked it very much to the Child Poverty Action Plan, and we've linked with partners corporately and further afield in relation to that. And we're working very hard with our Education Scotland Attainment Advisor and across the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative just to make sure that we're targeting our efforts in relation to that. We've introduced a number of different interventions. We are focusing very much on building those foundations. So we've introduced speech and language therapy, for example, into our early learning and childcare settings to address the already known language and communication issues that have happened as a result of the pandemic. We've introduced new roles into schools because we want to support families better. So we've had family support workers introduced into ELC settings and community link assistants and pupil care and welfare officers into our primary and secondary schools. We're also strengthening our links with our social work colleagues in relation to participation measures, and we've worked with our third sector partner organisations to strengthen some of the links for those target groups who also need that bit of extra support. So those young people with complex needs, children who are looked after, and those who are leaving school and don't have as positive a destination as the many young people that we do have in Perth and Kinross who go on to a positive destination. So overall, we are improving. We have not lost ground in terms of COVID in relation to that, but there's still much to do, and that's going to be further detailed within our education plan and our raising attainment strategy. Happy to take further questions, but I think that will provide an answer for the moment, Convener.
Thank you, Sharon. That seems a very comprehensive answer. Councillor Massey, does that answer your question?
Yes, it certainly does. I'm hoping that will give some clarity to the people that are tuning into this broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now, Councillor Ahern, you have 4 questions. Are they all related, or if they're all distinct and separate, I might take 1, 2 to start with and then come back for the other 2, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I've got the 4 questions. I've got 2 on children's services, 1 on adult social care and 1 on culture and leisure.
So if we take the children's services ones first then, and we'll come back to the others at the end.
Yeah, and Councillor Massey actually asked part of the question I was looking at, which was the indicators for pupils with deprived areas. And I noticed when you look at the 4 indicators, the last 2 on page 42, which is the number of pupils in general gaining 5+ awards at level 5, percentage of pupils gaining 5+ awards at level 6, and then you look at the deprived areas at level 5, they seem to be roughly similar. And then when we hit the deprived areas at level 6, it drops down dramatically, and the actual data range between 13 and 43% are below the highest point in there. The highest point of the data range is actually below the lowest or near the lowest point for the other 3. So we obviously have a problem in the deprived areas in level 6, and I think that would apply looking at the percentage data range across Scotland, and I wonder why there is that particular issue in those deprived areas. And what sort of numbers are we talking about? I have in past in scrutiny asked about numbers. Percentages are great, but it's how many pupils are we talking about? And the second part of my children's services questions is children with additional support needs. And I've asked before in this committee, when we come to performance indicators, why we don't measure how well local authorities are doing in terms of additional children with additional support needs in mainstream education. It's very hard to determine additional support needs pupils outside of the mainstream, but it's how we are performing with children within the mainstream education. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I would certainly endorse the second question that you asked. I think it's very important. Sharon, are you taking that answer? Thank you, Sharon.
Yes, Convener, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Ahern, to answer your question in relation to the tariff indicators in terms of pupils gaining 5 at 5 and 5 at 6, and these are based on SIMD levels, and members will be aware that while SIMD is an important indicator, there are some difficulties in relation to that, because Perth and Kinross, being a mixture of urban and rural, it doesn't always hit the indicators where in fact our difficulties are. It doesn't capture all of our deprivation factors, and that's why we use ACORN data as well as SIMD data to look at where we need to focus our attention. So where you've looked at 5 at 5, you did ask about numbers. So if we were to reach the national average for 5 at 5, we would need to ensure that additional 10 pupils were able to move up and to achieve. So that the Perth and Kinross results of 34% for this area represents 31 pupils. So if we were to get 10 more pupils up into that area, we would be hitting the national average. And similarly for pupils gaining 5 awards at 6, that would mean an additional 7 pupils across Perth and Kinross that would to get us to reach the national average. So you're quite right that although the numbers are small, they are still 17 pupils that we need to move up in relation to that. And that's how we look at it from a Perth and Kinross perspective when we're talking to our head teachers. So we break it down even further when we go into termly visits with our head teachers. and we look at the individual pupils within their schools, and we talk to them about what they're doing for those 10 pupils or for those 7 pupils and beyond. In relation to additional support needs, this has long been an issue that has been raised nationally, that there are no performance indicators in this benchmarking exercise which looks at additional support needs. In 2019, there was a national report, the Angela Morgan Review, which addressed this, and there is in fact a working group nationally looking at the additional measures that will be put into the National Performance Framework, which will indeed look at additional support and how children with additional support measure up against the national indicators. Once again, I would just want to reassure committee that we also take that into account in our local improvement authority activities. So we do look at children with ASN as opposed to others in our quality improvement framework, and we do indeed have that conversation with our schools. And it's the main reason that we have inclusive practice, and improving inclusive practice is the main focus for our education plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. We'll come back to you at the end. Thank you. So I now have Councillor David Illingworth.
Thank you. Fascinating listening to all the questions. I think the real value of the framework is in initiating conversations about quality and how to do better and where we're good, and as Sharon pointed out, that actually we only have 3 data zones out of 150 in Perth and Kinross that are in decile 1. So that may explain some of the volatility about responses in that particular issue. So my question is, are there any other examples of discussions and questions that have led to improvements in the council? So it's a very general question.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Who would like to answer that question? Charlene, perhaps?
Yeah. If I could just take that as an overall question. So in terms of improvements, every service is responsible for taking forward areas within their service for improvement and looking at that. And again, that's reported individually by services and through service plans.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor Illingworth?
Yep. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you. So next I have Councillor Alistair Bailey. You have a question, Alistair? Councillor Bailey?
Thank you. The reason for the pause there was just to arrange my microphone, and also to thank you, convener. Councillor Massey actually asked a very similar question to my initial line of inquiry. Therefore, I'll take this opportunity to dig a little bit further along those lines. The inequality is so stark, with only 16% of BKC kids from deprived backgrounds getting 5+ awards at level 6, compared to an average of 23% across the country. So not only are those kids left behind compared to their richer peers, they're also left behind the national average. So my question therefore is specifically, why are we lagging so far behind the Scottish average when it comes to the performance of the kids from the most deprived areas? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Sharon Johnson, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, thank you, convener.
Thank you, Sharon.
The question of why we're lagging so far behind, Councillor Bailey, is a question I can't answer. All I can answer is that we have been looking very closely at the performance within Perth and Kinross, and over the past 5 years we have seen a steady increase in that performance. As I've said before, SIMD doesn't exactly measure the types of challenges that we have within Perth and Kinross, and therefore we use ACORN as a data indicator. And absolutely, deprivation we know impacts on our children and young people. Perth and Kinross has not been a challenge authority. It has not been one of the authorities where there's lots of deprivation. And what we know is that sometimes where there are very small pockets and small numbers of children and young people, it becomes more of a challenge to put in targeted support into that. And so that is what we have focused on. We are very much looking at the equity part of our National Improvement Framework and looking very much more at targeting those resources to those young people across Perth and Kinross where we need to bring our performance up. So we're improving our inclusion team services. We're looking at the universal supports within our schools. We're strengthening those partnerships that we need to provide that. And one of the transformation projects that we're looking at across Education and Children's Services as a local authority is working with families, because that's where we know we will make the biggest difference. So we're supporting our professionals, we're looking at our data much more carefully, we're having challenging conversations with our school leaders, and we are looking at stronger partnerships with our partner agencies to work better with our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor Bailey, does that answer your question?
Thank you. Maybe a short follow-up, if I may. Approximately how many people, if we talk in full-time equivalents, does BKC have dedicated to solving this problem? Thank you.
Sharon?
I would answer that it does take the whole village, and I say this on a regular basis, Councillor Bailey, it takes a whole village to answer this problem. The whole of the education service and our partners are included in that, but I see the Executive Director wants to answer that question, so perhaps she'll do a better job than I will.
I did notice that coming up. I do apologise again. I don't know why my chat is so slow today, but it seems to be lagging behind everyone else's. So I didn't see Sheena's answer coming up before I asked you, Sharon, so I apologise. Sheena?
No apology necessary, Convener, and I will not be able to provide a better answer than Sharon provided. It simply indicated to really say exactly the same thing. It's everybody's responsibility to do this. So it's every teacher in every classroom, it's every member of every senior management team in every school, and it's the responsibility of the officers within Education and Children's Services who would be considered to be centrally based to work with each young person to help improve their outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey?
That's fantastic, reassuring. I actually, even though I asked for a number, I was reassured to hear that basically it's everyone, so I'm a happy councillor. Thank you.
Yeah, that's always good to have a happy councillor in the chamber. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. So now we have Councillor Wilson. You have a question, Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. It's a very broad question. Local government services must be the most inspected, reviewed, examined by everybody, every organisation that's based in Edinburgh and beyond that in terms of our performance and our outputs. When do we get the opportunity, and maybe Charlene has a clue of an answer to this, as officers first of all and as councillors, to look at benchmarking particularly to see its value for money in relation to the council in terms of performance and improvement, because I am aware, Convener, as you will be well aware, that a lot of our staff spend a lot of their time evaluating all the criteria that we've got to meet and reporting on these. And I'm not saying that's wrong or criticising it. I'm simply saying it does take away a significant percentage of staff time, some of whom are dedicated towards doing that. Some of the posts are there specifically for that purpose. But that comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost of other officers having to answer queries, answer questions, answer surveys, etc. Now, I'm not arguing against audit or inspection at all, but as an organisation, I would say we're up to our armpits in the inspection and audit process, and therefore when do we actually look at these to see if they're cost effective and if they're really helping us?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I notice Barbara Renton, you are going to answer this question.
Thank you, Convener.
Welcome, Barbara.
Hello. I'm sure that some elected members will remember that sort of over a number of years I've been quite heavily involved in sort of the local government benchmarking framework. The indicators here, Councillor Wilson, form part of what are now the key performance indicators. Audit Scotland sort of work with the improvement service and with local authorities in terms of what these are and what they measure. And I'm sure that for those of you who, like me, have got many years of experience on this, that when we did have the key performance indicators, there were an awful lot more of them. And there was an awful lot more work, you know, sort of even then, you know, sort of because a number of them were actually, you know, sort of audited if there was a big change, you know, sort of round about, you know, sort of any of the indicators. Now, I would suggest that some of that auditing was useful because it then allowed us to properly benchmark, because we do think that without that audit process, then sometimes the, you know, sort of we are actually comparing apples and against, you know, sort of not even pears, but sometimes, you know, sort of a potato, I think, you know, sort of they can be a wee bit far apart. So there are, you know, sort of, so they have been pared back, which is, you know, sort of in terms of this is quite beneficial for us. There is some useful work that we do in terms of benchmarking, you know, sort of across the piece. But, you know, sort of this particular set allows us then to have, you know, sort of a much more focused approach than we had previously.
Thank you, Barbara. Willie?
Thank you very much. I'm reassured with that response. My queries will still remain in the future, Convener, but it's useful to have that reassurance. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question, Councillor Wilson. You know, I have been in organisations where producing these frameworks was the end in itself, but I think if it's part of the ongoing quality improvement as part of normal business, then it serves a useful purpose. So thank you very much indeed for that. And now I come back to Councillor Ahern. I don't see anybody else with a question, so Councillor Ahern, if you want to pose your other two questions, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the first one is on adult social care, and it's on page 52, and it's with regards to the rate of readmission to hospital within 28 days per 1,000 discharges. Now, I'm aware that this period is obviously over COVID, so that may well have an impact on it. But I'm wondering why it's so high and why we have one of the worst readmission rates in Scotland. And what are we doing to actually try and improve that?
Who's best placed to, I don't see anybody offering to answer that question. Charlene, I will go to you to start. Kenny?
Sorry, Chair, I tried to get on the chat there, but for some reason there seems to be a bit of a delay. Yes, no, I'm happy to take that one.
Carry on.
Thanks, thank you. We were talking about data quality a minute ago, and this is another example. The readmission criteria in Tayside is recorded differently than a lot or the majority of other areas in Scotland. And one of the main differences is that people who are admitted to day hospital, so anybody attending a day hospital for appointment is included in these figures, so it's not just inpatients. So in short, these figures in Tayside, obviously including Perth and Kinross, can't actively be compared to the rest of Scotland. That said, the figures are still of some use in that we can track the figures for Perth and Kinross on a year-on-year basis. And certainly the month-on-month figures for readmissions do show that the figure is decreasing. And in November 21, there was a reduction of 9.28% in readmissions from the previous years, and that is actually higher than the national average reduction. So again, while we're not comparing apples with apples, we are still able to use this information just to track our progress in Perth and Kinross. And like I say, it's worth bearing in mind these figures are, what, 3 years out of date now, and we are showing that the figures since then are showing we are getting on top of the number of readmissions in Perth and Kinross.
Thank you, Kenny. Chris, does that answer your question?
It does, yes, and it's quite surprising that they're not measured uniformly across the country, and I hope they're measured uniformly across the family group. Otherwise, yeah, it may skew the national figures, but it also skew the family group figures as well. But I'm reassured what Kenny was saying there regarding the improvements we've done since then. So if we just move on to my last question, which is under culture and leisure, and it's on page 54 with regards to the cost for attendance at sports facilities. And I noticed that we are dramatically higher than the Scottish average and the family group. And in fact, when you look at the data range, it puts us in roughly in the middle of that data range. But I doubt very much it puts us in the middle of the 32 local authorities. And I just wonder why that is so high. And did the fact that the Perth leisure pool have an impact on that?
Fiona Robertson, are you best placed to answer that one?
Yes, thanks, convener. Thanks for the question, Councillor Hearn. You're absolutely right. It's a blip, not a trend. The figure takes into account not just the money spent on fixing Perth Leisure Pool, but also some other capital investment that had already been planned for the pool before the flood happened. But Live Active Leisure decided to just go ahead and do the works in Awana, hence an unusually high level of spend in that year.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wanted to check, and that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. They were actually very good questions, and the answers perhaps when this report comes back to committee again, it might be helpful if there are some anomalies like that, that the reasons for those are explained, particularly the ones around the readmissions to hospitals, for example. So it's just a bit of narrative that I think would help elected members review the figures in some sort of context.
Yeah, I think you're right. Where there are anomalies, it has to be highlighted, because otherwise, when we're looking at it, there are glaring questions, certainly like the cost of attendance at sport facilities, and that little explanation under that would probably help very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now, I don't see anybody wishing to make any comment, at least there's nothing in the chat box, but if there is somebody who wishes to make a comment on this report, can you please either raise your hand or speak out, because I'm not seeing it in the chat. Okay, silence is sometimes golden. So I'll thank you very much then to Charlene and to Sharon and to Sheena and to Fiona for your input to this report. And I think, is the report noted therefore? Noted?
Noted.
Thank you. And I think as well for the previous report in item 5, I didn't formally ask for or request the report to be noted. So can I do that now, please?
Item 5, noted.
Noted.
Thank you. Thank you,
Noted.
everyone. Okay, thank you. So we now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the scrutiny review, the report into the closure of Abernight Primary School. Now, as many of you know, among the elected members, I had to take some medical leave at the end of January. So my involvement in this review was minimal, other than to basically set it up and help set the terms of reference. So I'm going to hand over this agenda item to Councillor Parrott, who has led on the review and chaired the review panel. So Councillor Parrott, can I hand this over to you now, please?
Thank you, convener. Thank you for letting me introduce the review into the process of seeking judicial review of the call-in notice regarding the closure of Abernight Primary School. As she has just said, because the convener was medically indisposed, it fell to me ultimately to lead the review process. Firstly, some thank yous. I want to thank those who gave evidence to the review for their detailed answers to panel's detailed questions. I want to thank the members of the review panel themselves for their detailed attention to the matter in hand. I want to thank also the officers of the council who supported the review process, in particular Mr. Jeff Fogg, whose extensive notes enabled the writing of the report. The meat of the review was most of 9 hours on 3 long virtual meetings. It was only proper that the report should have support of all panel members, and it has taken some time to ultimately achieve that final position. By way of introduction, I want to highlight 5 points in particular. Firstly, the Perth and Kinross process for considering school closures took the advice of the consultant who advised Scottish Government on the appropriate processes to be established, and he had no concerns with the Perth and Kinross process. Secondly, I believe there were sound internal processes within the council. Within ECS, the matter was given detailed consideration. Within the executive officer team, the same applies. The convener of lifelong learning and the leader of the council were appropriately consulted and involved in discussions. But ultimately, the decision to go ahead with legal process was rightly taken by the head of legal and governance. Thirdly, highly experienced expert legal opinion was sought in the matter, and their advice was fully taken account of. Fourthly, once the judicial review was launched, There was no change to the position through the legal answers process from the respondent, the Scottish Government, in this case. And it was felt, if anything, that that answers process strengthened the Council's position. Finally, the court sifting process gave the judicial review a clear pass without asking for additional information, suggesting that there were strong legal grounds for challenge and the judicial review was worthy. That's a non-legal term, but I'm not a lawyer. But the court has a duty to make sure that there are proper grounds for bringing a case to judicial review. And in this case, the court determined that without asking additional questions. But it's the nature of the law that cases are won and lost. In this case, the judge, Lady Wise, found against Perth and Kinross Council. That is perhaps a matter of regret, but the judge's decision must be respected. However, her judgment does not mean that processes that ultimately led to her decision were unsound. Lady Wise has established precedent which has clarified the law. Perth and Kinross Council have perhaps paid the price of this clarification, but that may benefit other councils in the future and indeed ourselves. Thank you. Before I move to questions, I want to give other panel members the opportunity to make comment if they wish, if they could so indicate. And in the chamber, Councillor Illingworth has raised his hand. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. Firstly, I too would like to pay tribute to the other members of the group, Councillors Parrott, Massey and Smith. The job of scrutiny is to be the critical friend to the Council, and it is non-political. We had a lot of work to do and we worked as a team. Although we have different political views, we left our party allegiances at the door and got on with the work. Throughout the process, I often ask myself, if I'd been in a different situation, would I have been as fair and thorough as Councillors Parrott and Councillors Massey? And the answer is, I hope so. I too would like to express gratitude to the 5 people we interviewed who gave up their time so readily, and to the officers who both supported us through our deliberations and produced such a clear report in double quick time. We interviewed representatives from the 3 groups who were involved in the decision to proceed to judicial review: education managers, lawyers, and politicians. For the education managers, the Executive Director of ECS, Sheena Devlin, explained her surprise at the call-in notice from the Scottish Government. Over many years, Perth and Kinross had earned an excellent reputation for thoroughly following school closure procedures properly. For example, Stronach School, 2011, Stralach Primary School, 2012, Struan Primary School, 2017, Porteviot School, 2016, and Blaringon School, 2020. That reputation was strong enough that the Council was often asked for advice from other councils. And previously, Scottish ministers had not called in these closures, though the same process was followed. In addition, in the case of Abernite, the services of a highly experienced consultant were secured, and that consultant made no negative comments on the closure procedure. For the lawyers, evidence was taken from the head of legal services, Lisa Simpson, along with a senior PKC lawyer. We accepted that the decision to go to judicial review was an operational decision made by officers alone under the scheme of administration. The report before us explains the complex process of taking a course to the Court of Session in more detail than I can cover in this statement. But what stood out was the reasoning behind the selection of Brodie's as solicitors and James Muir QC as advocate. They had much experience in taking similar courses to the Court of Session successfully, and they had outstanding reputations for offering sound and trustworthy advice. A common theme from both the education managers and the lawyers was the use of experienced external advisors. This meant that at every stage of the process, there was effective quality assurance and robust challenge throughout. Lastly, we heard from the politicians, Councillor Shires, convener of Lifelong Learning, and Councillor Lyle, leader of the council. While the decision to go to the quarter session was an operational matter and therefore taken by officers alone, it was clear that the politicians were kept fully informed throughout by the educational managers and the lawyers. It is beyond doubt that there was a great deal of mutual respect and trust between the three groups, and the politicians were fully supportive of the decision to seek a judicial review. Deputy Convener, the aim of our scrutiny group was to seek out lessons to be learned that the Council could benefit from in the future. We found none. The decision to take legal action should never be taken lightly, and it wasn't. It was taken in the full knowledge that the decision could go against us, and unfortunately the decision did go against us. But the process followed by the Council was thorough and proper. Thank you.
I'm now happy to take questions if people can indicate those in the chamber or on the chat. Councillor Bailey.
Two questions, if I may, Convener. The first one is thank you obviously to the panel for your work and the officers as well as the members who gave evidence. Who was it who drafted the findings and the conclusions within this report, please? And do all of the members of the review panel fully support all of the conclusions we have in front of us? Then I have one more question, if I may, but maybe we answer this one first.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. The report was drafted on behalf of the review panel by Mr. Fogg on the basis of notes that he took during the evidence sessions, but that report before you has the full support of all of the members of the review panel. Thank you.
Microphone seems to be live. Thank you. My second question is who provided the legal advice to the review panel, please?
Again, since Lisa Simpson was giving evidence to the review panel, such legal advice as we required came from Mr. Fogg. Thank you.
If I may follow up, that comes as a bit of a surprise to me because although I wasn't called to give evidence to the panel, so I haven't disclosed this until this point in time, on the 2nd of September 2019, Jeff Fogg and the then Chief Exec informed me that an emergency motion I plan to bring to that day's full council would undermine confidence in officers, and therefore on behalf of Provost, they told me it would be ruled incompetent. I'm happy to share the text of that motion, but one part of that motion was that the council would have been presented with the option to agree with the following clause. This council is concerned that the reasons for this legal action and the potential costs have not been shared with elected members beyond those mentioned above. And that was something I was planning on bringing forward on the 2nd of September, as I mentioned, and it was Mr. Fogg, as well as the then Chief Executive, who advised me that would not be competent to put in front of council. But unfortunately, I'm only able to disclose that now because I wasn't called by the review panel. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bailey. The review panel took evidence from people that it considered appropriate. And I think that for myself, the matter that you refer to was dealt separately and discreetly, if you like, in its time and place. Thank you.
I may just have brief right to reply on that. I respect your position. However, I think it's possibly material that there was I can't remember the exact date, but Councillor McCall had a sort of pre-scrutiny evidence gathering session. I think this would have been in 2021 at some point. I couldn't pinpoint a date without searching my email. I don't want to hold up the committee. But I did mention on that session that this motion I'd attempted to bring forward had been declined. So the convener was aware of this matter. I did make her aware to the best of my understanding of this information, but it's still, so I was therefore surprised not to be called to give evidence by the panel.
Councillor Bailey, thank you for that. I can only say that for my involvement, I came in later in the day. I was not privy to all of the previous discussions, but I believe that the review carried out the remit that it was given thoroughly in the light of the evidence that it took. And I don't believe that the earlier decisions and issues that you refer to have materially influenced what we found. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll revisit this in a comment.
Councillor Simpson, I believe you have two questions, which I'm happy to take together if you wish.
Thank you, Vice Convener. They are related. It's some time since I sat in the Scrutiny Committee, Vice Convener. Indeed, the last time we met in Dewars Riggs, so that was a while ago. But I have a couple of queries with clarification relating to Part 3, which is and the Scrutiny Review Group itself, which states at the end of it that it was a relatively comprehensive form of a light review. And I think we would all agree with that. I just wondered that as the review itself progressed and it became obvious it was not going to be a light review, was any consideration given to reorganising this in some way and recognise that fact?
Thank you, Councillor Simpson, for your question. I think that although the matters became fairly weighty, it was always considered that this review was in the light review format. Thank you.
I'm happy with that. And one just very small point, referring to point 3.3, and I have absolutely no issue with the decision that you should be the acting convener. That was the right decision, but it says it was agreed. I just wonder if it could be clear who actually agreed this. Was it the small group itself or was it the Scrutiny Committee?
It was, to my recollection, within the review group itself. Thank you.
Just further to that, was any consideration given to having an additional member to keep the numbers up?
To my knowledge, no, there was not, but it was felt that it was still proper for us to go ahead at 4, even though the convener was not able to attend because she was medically indisposed. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Vice Convener.
Councillor Stewart, you're in the chat with a question. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Sorry, apologies. I'm just keeping my camera off due to rural broadband at the moment. At the end of paragraph 6.1 in the report, it says that it wasn't part of the review to assess the legal advice of the head of legal and governance service, nor of other legal professionals acting on the council's behalf. I just wonder, given that obviously there were, I think if I recall correctly in Lady Wise's judgment, 4 tests that had to be passed for the judicial review application to succeed. And they all had to be passed, and the council's position passed not a single one of those tests. Why the review group decided not to look at the legal advice?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. The review group's remit was to look at process and we did not look at the legal advice in the detail that you seek there, because that would have been crossing the border from process into professional judgment, and that would not have been appropriate to the terms of reference for the review. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because in our prior discussion on this matter in September 2020, the commitment was given by legal staff that they would happily go through the legal points of argument as part of the scrutiny review. And I think you yourself, Vice Convener, at about 2 hours 13 minutes into that section of the meeting, said that you would look forward to doing that as part of the review. I mean, clearly, the other commitment that was given on that date was that the scope, process and timetable would be agreed by committee. But I think what the committee has actually been presented with is the review group's own definition of the scope and process that they would be following. My next question is regarding the lessons learnt. You know, whether there's any learning for the future, or whether there are any recommendations to take forward. Can I just confirm that the review group found, you know, after we have spent £100,000 worth of taxpayers' money, there was no learning or to take forward for the future, and no recommendations?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. With regard to your first point, by the time I became involved and the review panel was established, the terms of reference had been subsequent to the date you mentioned in 2020. The terms of reference had been extensively discussed between the convener and officers, and the terms of reference were what the review panel took forward. In terms of lessons learnt, no process is absolutely perfect, without a doubt, but in terms of substantive lessons to be learnt from this process, the review panel concluded, if you like, as is in the papers, that there were no substantive lessons in terms of process that came out of the review. Thank you.
Okay, well, just to follow up again, referring back to our the committee's September 2020 discussion of the matter, the Director of Education and Children's Services committed to making changes required as a result of the judgments, plural, both of the school closure review panel and of the Lady Wise. So I'm wondering what changes were made and why they aren't mentioned in the report. The Head of Legal and Governance Services said that the intent to bring legal proceedings could have been subject to a broader discussion. These are all about 1.5 hours into the meeting. The Head of Legal and Governance Services also said that they could look at how to inform members of Lifelong Learning Committee and gave a commitment about such matters, and gave a commitment to do that. And then I think it was Mrs. Robertson, one of the heads of service, who said that there was a point of learning which was to look at the need to discuss community needs in relation to a school closure before rather than after the proposal to close the school. So, you know, we've already had commitments that there would be lessons learnt and baked into the process, and I'm wondering why the review group didn't go back and look at these matters and incorporate these as recommendations.
Thank you again. The lessons learnt that you refer to are, to my mind, lessons learnt with regard to the operational conduct of the process, rather than lessons learnt as a result of, if you like, the process of seeking judicial review. And given that the judgment went against us, it was quite proper that there were lessons to be learnt from the application of the processes established by Scottish Government and the decision of Lady Wise. As for Lisa Simpson's regard to broader discussion, I don't believe I'm competent to make reference to what further broader discussion that she might wish to have had. Thank you.
Vice Convener.
Yes, Convener, Karen Donaldson wishes to contribute. I didn't see you in the chat. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Vice Convener. For the benefit of the committee, I also supported the Scrutiny Review Group process. And I wish to confirm what Councillor Parrott has indicated, and that is there are clearly lessons from the school review, school closure process, because we now have a much clearer understanding of thresholds and the tests that should be applied when looking at when an education authority considers a school closure. So there is absolutely learning from that. However, that wasn't as a result of the scrutiny review process. That was a learning for officers as a base on the basis of the overall decision from Lady Wise.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Donaldson. I think we can now move on to Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson, you have a question.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thank you for the part you've played in this to expedite matters since the last meeting. This has taken some time to come to a conclusion. What lessons have we learned on that, and what ideas do you have that might help move things on at a pace in future if there are reviews to be carried out, as no doubt there will be by the Scrutiny Committee in the new council?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for your question. I don't mean to be flippant, but it might have helped if we hadn't had a COVID pandemic. But to take your question more seriously, I think that, yes, there are perhaps lessons to be learnt in terms of reviewing the progress of how such reviews are moving ahead. I essentially was involved only when the convener became medically indisposed and sought to move the process forward from there. But I think that even given COVID, matters were lengthy, and I think there might be proper place in the future for, if you like, review of any reviews which are ongoing to ensure that pace is established and tempo maintained. Thank you.
Vice Convener, I'm grateful for your answer, and I realise you cannot foresee the future or the detailed role of the new Scrutiny Committee in the new council, but I do think there's an opportunity for if we can, you said it, Vice Convener, to review the reviews, but make sure that things do carry on at a pace, and there's no undue delay in the future, because some of these things, there's a moment in time to do them, and the longer they go on, I think that the colder the pot gets, and the less appropriate it may be. So thanks for your comments. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, thank you. I can only agree with you. I believe Councillor Illingworth wishes to add comment. Councillor Illingworth.
Point of order to the extent that I don't believe standing orders allow for one member to contribute twice to a debate. With due respect, Councillor Illingworth spent close to 5 minutes commenting earlier on this paper and its contents.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bailey. Given the nature of this paper, I felt it was only fair that other panel members had the opportunity to make a comment in its introduction, and therefore, if you would allow, I don't regard that as being his contribution to the debate. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Vice.
Third time. Councillor Hearn, you wish to raise a point of order as well.
Yes, I do, Vice Convener, and you've just said what I was going to say. You specifically asked Councillor Illingworth to speak, and it wasn't a contribution that he himself was going to put forward. So I'm just backing up what you said, Vice Convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you. Got there at last. Okay. Like Councillor Wilson, I'd like to express my dismay that this report has taken 18 months to come before this committee. The delay has meant that some witnesses were unable to be called, that memories were less clear due to the passage of time, and if mistakes had been made, then 18 months could have passed without the value of those lessons learned being implemented. Convener, the role of Scrutiny Committee is to help the Council to be more effective. The Council has an annual turnover of £400 million, 5,500 employees, and plays a massive part in the communities we are all here to serve. Over the last 5 years, the Scrutiny Committee has not been playing its important role in supporting the Council's operations. Now, with regards to Councillor Wilson's suggestion, I'd like to suggest that in future we have a biannual update on the scope and progress of scrutiny group reviews. And I know that's kind of difficult to put forward in the current situation coming into election, and we don't know who will be running the Scrutiny Committee. But from a Conservative point of view, we will certainly support that in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. I am minded to support that, but I'm unsure as to what is the correct way of taking that forward at present. We are, if you like, debating the paper itself, and that essentially lies outside the paper. So if I can turn to committee officers to, if you like, give a ruling on how we might best take that forwards.
Yeah, I think, Convener, that's you summarised it very well there. You know, so I think it's something officers can take on for now, really. Certainly, is yeah, certainly something we can take on board. I think the salient point of matters is, so at present, that we are debating the paper in front of us and not so much the procedure on reviews. We are, you know, looking at the minute at the paper on the Abernethy review. So I think that's the important fact. But it is certainly something we can take Ignace off Councillor Illingworth and keep on board.
Vice Convener, if I could just come in on a different point, because it goes back to Councillor Bailey's earlier questions during the debate. I apologise for maybe not coming in sooner, but I think it's appropriate to note that the members of the review group are free to decide whom they wish to call, and any officer or councillor that they asked to attend did make themselves available, but it was within the discretion of the review group themselves who they chose to take evidence from, and they exercised that.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Fogg.
Thank you, Mr. Fogg, for that. With regard to what Councillor Illingworth has said with regard to regular review, I would be happy to agree to such biannual review of reviews in progress as part of acceptance of this report, but I'm not sure whether that is proper. But I am certainly not minded to, if you like, reject what yourself and Councillor Wilson have proposed. Thank you. I was looking, if you like, for guidance as to whether that would be proper. If someone could give me that, I'd be grateful. Okay, in that case, given the comments from Councillor Illingworth and Councillor Wilson, I would be happy to incorporate that into how matters are taken forward in the future. Thank you. I believe there is a further question from Councillor Stewart. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Convener, I didn't really finish the questioning on the concerns that I was raising, that there are no lessons to be learnt from this. We have spent close to £100,000. That is not including the sunk costs of officer time, which again was brought up in the September 2020 meeting, and I guess no information on that was provided to the Scrutiny Review Group. It's certainly not in the report. So I'm just wondering whether it's possible to, there was no limit put on how we couldn't have known in advance. We could maybe have professionals could maybe have approximated or guessed at how much the costs of pursuing the judicial review were, but there was no limit put on that in advance. That £100,000, although it came from an underspend, as I understand, within ECS or Corporate and Democratic Services, it varies depending which answer you listen to. That came from an underspend, but that underspend is then not available to support frontline services and the delivery of education. So I'm wondering whether, acknowledging that the legal staff within Corporate and Democratic Services will normally be undertaking legal actions to, pursue recovery of council tax or care home payments or whatever else it might be, whether for what the report acknowledges is a significant high-profile matter, whether there should be different rules that apply. If it was a varment between budgets or between services, that has a limit in terms of how much officers can decide to spend. We spent over £100,000 on this, and so I wonder whether it's possible to learn that we should undelegate this authority to officers, and it should be democratically taken by members of council.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. Without doubt, £100,000 is not small beer. I'm not a great expert on legal matters, but I know legal proceedings are expensive. But as we found, everything in this process suggested that we had a good case that should be pursued, and therefore, if you like, the costs follow the case. I'm also taken with the point, if you like, that an imposition of a cost threshold, if you want to put it that way, might get in the way of the operational manoeuvre space of the head of legal and governments, in whose remit these decisions are. But Mr. Fogg has indicated to me that he wants to add to this answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I heard what Councillor Stewart stated there, but I think the answer to your position is set out both in the report and in the remarks which Councillor Parrott has made this morning, namely that the progress of the action was an operational matter because it depended on legal judgment, and that is taken ultimately by the head of legal and governance services, who had access to further advice both from external solicitors and from senior counsel. He seemed to be suggesting that because it's controversial, that it might therefore be more appropriate that there be elected member involvement in the matter. The controversial nature of the action wouldn't remove it from being an operational matter that nonetheless continues to sit with a qualified legal professional. So
That's the position set out in the report, and that's the position that's been articulated by Councillor Parrott today, and consistent with the remit.
Thank you.
Just to clarify,
Councillor, if you could hang on a minute, I believe Mrs. Donaldson wishes to come in with a contribution to the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. My contribution is to confirm that this was an operational matter that should be free from any political interference. I accept that the costs were significant, but it wasn't possible to set a limit. But at all stages of the judicial review process, there was no indication given by the expert legal advice that the council were receiving, nor through the sifting process, that this was not a judicial review that was without merit, and therefore there was a constant review about whether the case should continue, and that continued throughout the process, and the legal assessment throughout that was that this was a case worthy of pursuing. And the other comments, I think, are well documented within the report, and as cited by the Vice Convener today, that on this occasion, unfortunately, the decision went against us, but there were the indications were to the contrary throughout the process, which is why this matter was continued to be pursued. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Donaldson. But I'm also harking back to the evidence that we heard that while the decision was a legal one for the head of legal and governance, serious discussion would and did take place with the leader of the council. But at the end of the day, it is an operational decision on a legal matter, which is the province of the head of legal and governance. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just clarify this? Because in answer to a question at Strategic Policy and Resources Committee last week, when we were discussing Business Gateway, first of all, the Chief Executive said that in relation to what elected members decided, officers would enact that decision, and that included legal staff at the council, A, and B, we were told that sorry, I've lost that train of thread. Anyway, if I can return to the issue of whether it's an operational matter or not. Oh, that's right. Sorry. In relation to the Business Gateway, I was told that
with respect, Councillor Stewart, we're talking about the Abernite School Review, not the Business Gateway matter.
No, I understand that completely. I'm drawing an analogy between the advice that was provided last week and the advice that's currently being provided. I asked the question whether the delegation, whether within the scheme of administration of the council, authority was delegated to the head of legal and governance services, or legal staff as it might be, to take legal action, and the answer was that it is delegated. So it is presumably a matter which can be undelegated. So that's my question. Is the answer that we are being given this week correct, or is the answer that we were given, the answers that we were given at a different committee but on the same principle last week correct?
I can't answer for the matter of this week or last week, but what I think I can say is that the matter of whether something is delegated or not in the scheme of administration can be looked at in terms of consideration of the scheme of administration, but not here. But Mr. Fogg wishes to add to the response. Thank you.
I think that that's correct, Councillor Parrott, what you've just stated there. We have a scheme of administration, it is delegated, and no doubt what is and is not properly regarded as an operational matter is something that will be factored into how the scheme of delegation or administration is drawn up. And for reasons that I've already stated, the report has stated, and you stated,
decisions on whether or not to take or raise or defend legal actions normally do sit with a head of legal and governance and are subsequently delegated by her in turn. And that's consistent with the position I suspect take and the advice you were given last week, Councillor Stewart, and this morning.
Well, sorry, I disagree because it seems to me that those are two contrary points of view that we've heard within the space of 5 days, unfortunately.
With respect, Councillor Stewart, I think that is a matter then to be brought up outside this committee meeting and not further here. Thank you.
Okay, well, in that case, can I ask the question about the issue of the controversial or high-profile cases? The report states it is only a minority of cases which are controversial or of high profile or which carry significant associated financial or reputational risks. In such cases, it is appropriate that there is appropriate engagement with elected members. So that is what the report states at 6.3. So why is it not appropriate to leave that decision with elected members who might choose to follow advice to sue the Scottish Government, or might choose to not pursue such an action in future?
Mr. Fogg will answer your point there, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I think there's an important point arising there, Councillor Stewart. I think a distinction needs to be drawn between informing elected members of controversial high-risk actions as opposed to seeking their approval to continue with it. This is a case where the proposal was made known to the convener of lifelong learning and to lead administration, but they were not being asked to approve the decision because that decision sat with the head of legal and governance. And that's what the report is explaining.
Yes, but it's not a question of informing. I'm reading from the report. In such cases, it is appropriate that there is appropriate engagement with elected members. That's not just a question of informing. That is a question of consulting and involving in the decision. And so why can't that decision be made by, in a high profile, controversial, with associated financial and reputational risks? Why can't that decision be taken by elected members?
Because then you're asking the elected members to decide to weigh up the legal evidence and engage in a process that you're employing a solicitor to undertake for the council.
Thank you, Mr. Fogg. Councillor Stewart, I think we've reached the end, if I may, of this line of questioning, and I intend to move on. Are there any other members of the committee who wish to ask questions? Thank you. No, okay, I see none. Can we then agree to accept this report?
Agreed.
No.
Agreed.
Okay, let's Councillor Bailey. Then, if you can we recess for 5 minutes and we'll come back to this. Hang on, recess for 5 minutes. I would like to propose the motion in respect of this report that we accept the report and incorporate the matter of having a biannual review at Scrutiny Committee of ongoing reviews that are before scrutiny. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Illingworth is indicating in the chamber that he seconds that motion.
I'm happy to second that motion. This committee is a non-political committee and it's Conservatives and SNP working together. So, thank you.
I understand that there is an amendment coming forward from Councillor Bailey. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. Before I proceed, and in the interest of full transparency, I should note that my 2 children currently attend Abernite Primary School. However, they enrolled at that school in October 2020, which was 5 months after Lady White's judgment was published, and over a full year after the governance matters that are subject to scrutiny review today were discussed. I therefore do not believe that I have a conflict of interest, given that we are scrutinising a decision to challenge a call-in, which was taken a full year prior to my children attending the school. So I'll speak just briefly before I move my amendment, then I'll put the amendment onto the chat. To call this report a whitewash would be an insult to all the professional decorators in Perth and Kinross. We can also see straight through this particular whitewash. The assurance that the convener gave last year that scrutiny would bring more openness has failed to ring true. Some of us saw this coming. My colleague, Councillor McDade, attempted to debate and adjust the terms of reference, but was barred from doing so in a previous meeting of this committee. I tried to get the process conducted in public, but was voted down. Other elected members questioned why the membership of the panel was decided behind closed doors. I tried to bring a motion to full council on the 2nd of September 2019 that would have given all elected members the chance to assess this decision before the fact, but was told that Provost would not allow such a motion. This, therefore, is no longer just about Abernite. This is no longer just about £100,000 of taxpayer money wasted on the endeavour. This is now about whether this council is able to critically assess its own actions when it gets things wrong and take learnings from those mistakes. I see none of that in this report, and I think that's because the panel really wasn't trying hard enough. We need to dig deeper into these matters. We need to give everyone involved in the process, or who tried to intervene, a chance to give their evidence. The motivations and governance around this decision to spend £100,000 on a failed legal action against the Scottish Government must be examined fully and in public. I therefore amend to the extent that this committee accepts the proposal for a biannual review of scrutiny reviews, but rejects the conclusion of the scrutiny review panel and determines that: number 1, a new scrutiny process will be initiated in the new council term to fully examine the decision to challenge Scottish ministers on the call-in decision with regard to Abernite Primary School's proposed closure. Number 2, the scrutiny panel meeting shall be held in public unless information is to be shared which needs to be kept confidential under the specific terms of the Local Government Act. Number 3, the membership of the review panel shall be determined in public session of the Scrutiny Committee. Number 4, the review shall include the legal advice received prior to deciding to proceed with the action within its scope. And finally, number 5, all elected members in this current term shall be invited to give evidence if they so wish. And I'll just paste that to the chat if you'll bear with me 1 second. Sorry about the font size, but that should be visible in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Do you have a seconder for your amendment? I see that Councillor Stewart is seconding your amendment. I see also that Councillor Wilson wishes to make comment here. Councillor Wilson.
Can I second the amendment?
Colin, Councillor Stewart, I've taken your seconding. I've seen it in the chat. Do you wish to speak to it?
Well, if you'll allow me a comment after Councillor Wilson, I'm happy for him to go first.
I think, Councillor, if you wish to speak to the seconding, speak now, and then I will take Councillor Wilson's comment.
Okay, thank you, convener. I have to say that I completely agree with Councillor Bailey and the remarks that he made in putting forward his amendment. It's clear to me that we're in a situation where there are significant governance issues which haven't been considered by the Scrutiny Review Panel, and those answers have not been forthcoming, and we are getting answers which are different to answers which we were given on an analogous matter just a few days ago. It cannot be right that the council has spent more than £100,000 worth of substantially more once the sunk costs are included. It cannot be right that the council has spent more than £100,000 worth of taxpayers' money and that there is no learning to take forward. There are no lessons to be learnt from this situation. It should be, and the report acknowledges it, it should be for elected members to decide whether or not to pursue legal action against the Scottish Government. It is perfectly within the realms of possibility that the scheme of administration could be amended as such. I think that is a useful point of learning, but it should come through a proper scrutiny review process. And so I would wholeheartedly agree that the scrutiny review into this decision should be looked at again in the new council term, as Councillor Bailey proposes.
Thank you for that seconding, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Wilson, your comment now, please.
Thanks, convener. I totally deprecate the use of the word whitewash in relation to this decision. That's an insult to you, Vice Convener, and the members of the panel. The outcome of the panel discussion, which is you've outlined the amount of work that went into it, albeit that it had been considerably delayed, which I think was extremely unfortunate, but you took a grip of it, Vice Convener, you got on with the job and you got a result. If members of this committee don't like that result, then they're free to say so, but I don't think we should be using emotive language like whitewash. The whole issue is quite clear. As part of the Abernight School process, the council followed its usual procedures and went, in fact, beyond its usual procedures in terms of local consultation, looking at potential new catchment areas and consulting widely with people in the Abernight area and also in the Insture area. Now that's on record. That's all quite clearly on record. And the procedure that was followed was that the Scottish Government had commended the council on using, and that was actually, if I can say, borrowed by other local authorities who used our version of the procedures as an exemplar way of taking forward the difficult decisions surrounding school closures. These are all facts that were well recorded in previous discussions and debates and correspondence. We are where we are with this. It's been a difficult and taxing time for everybody, but I think I've got to stand up for the officers of the council and you, Vice Convener, who have taken this matter forward in an exemplary way. Of course we've learned lessons from the outcome. The lessons are that we followed the procedures correctly and that none of the rules were broken, because we had already a track record of sticking with these procedures in the past. If I've been blunt about it, Vice Convener, perhaps somebody should be asking questions about why the Scottish Government called this in, not how the council proceeded. But that wasn't in the remit of the, before you tell me, Vice Convener, that wasn't in the remit of the working group, and I'm not going back over that now, but there lots of questions could be raised, but we are discussing the outcome of the review group that had a set
Councillor Wilson, I know you're keen.
Challenges to, yeah, okay, but I'm simply saying that this this debate could be extended and expanded out in all sorts of ways. I'm not seeking to do that at all today, Convener. I think we have dealt with the matter, we've dealt with it properly, and you have taken it forward thoroughly, and therefore that I will be certainly supporting your motion.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for your comment. Can we now move to the vote, please?
Convener, just before we do you wish to exercise your right to sum up, or are you waiving that?
No, I'm happy to waive it. Thank you.
Otherwise, I wonder if I could just respond briefly to some aspects of Councillor Bailey's comments this morning.
Please do.
Because I was slightly surprised to hear Councillor Bailey introduce his motion in the terms he did. For my part, I assisted the work of the Scrutiny Review Group. I did so in good faith, and it's disappointing that he has described it in the terms there. Looking at the terms of his motion, in terms
Vice Convener, it's hard to hear Mr. Fogg. Can you move closer to the microphone, please?
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Hearn, this is a new process for me. Looking at the terms of the amendment, which is calling for a further review. Having assisted the panel as it did over the 7 meetings that it had to allow this report to be produced, I am struggling to, and bearing in mind the comprehensive report that was submitted to Lifelong Learning in August of 2020 and the Scrutiny Committee of September of that year. Thereafter, this work, I'm beginning to, I really don't know what more there would be to examine, but it's competent, so it is appropriate that it goes through to the vote. Thank you, Convener.
No, we'll move to the vote. My apologies, Councillor Bailey. Please, you have a right to sum up too.
Thank you, and I'll just use the opportunity to extend an apology to Mr. Fogg and any other officers. My intention with characterising the report as a whitewash was directing my frustration at the elected members involved in putting it together, and ultimately bringing this forward today with their full approval. That was my intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Can we now move to the vote?
Yes, thank you very much, Vice Convener. In line with the Council standing orders, we'll now move to a roll call vote, as you've just stated. And so, members, I'll go through names alphabetically, and when I call your name, if you can let me know whether you'll be voting for the motion as proposed by the Vice Convener and seconded by Councillor Illingworth, or the amendment as proposed by Councillor Bailey and seconded by Councillor Stewart, and members do, of course, have the right to abstain, so do wish. Right, so Councillor Hearn.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor Jarvis.
Motion.
Councillor Massey. Sorry, Councillor Massey, I just need you to confirm that.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Councillor Parrott.
Motion.
Councillor Reid.
Motion.
Councillor Sawa.
Motion.
Councillor Simpson.
Motion.
Councillor Smith.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
And Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Okay, members, that was 11 votes in favour of the motion and 2 in favour of the amendment, and so therefore the motion will carry.
Thank you very much. I will now hand back to the convener to conclude the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and I'd like to take this opportunity now to also thank Andrew, Councillor Parrott in particular, for stepping in at such short notice to take on this role to conduct this review, and to all the others who served on the panel and the officers who provided evidence and who supported the panel. This, as we all know, is the last scrutiny meeting of this current council term, and some of us will not be returning. For those of you who have chosen not to return, then I wish you all a very happy retirement from at least council life. For those of us who have not chosen, who have chosen to try and return, then I wish you all good luck, and we'll see some or all of you as soon as possible. In a more general term, I think that I want to thank officers for my term as convener of scrutiny. I think it's I became convener at a time when, just shortly before the pandemic struck, so I don't think I've actually convened a meeting in the council chamber once, and it's been certainly challenging to learn, how to do this remotely. But sorry, is somebody saying something? I thought I heard somebody saying something. But so I do want to thank all the members of the committee who have served on the committee, both during my time and before, for their patience and forbearance as we navigated a new way of working. I think it's been extremely helpful. I do think that I have some reflections on my time as the convener of scrutiny, and I will probably convey those separately to officers at the end after this meeting. I think there are always lessons to be learned generally, not specifically, and I think that we can all move forward on that basis. So unless there are any other matters arising or any final comments to be made on the committee at today's meeting, anybody get any final comments? Councillor Stewart, are you raising a point of order?
Well, it was more a question, really, convener. But the update on the other scrutiny review.
Right. Okay. So the other. So thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. Yes, you're correct. The other scrutiny review was due to have been conducted by myself, but because I was unavailable, that has been put on hold, and that will need to be carried forward into the next term. Okay, so I think, Danny, if you can record that for the minute, I think that would be extremely helpful.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you for reminding me, Colin. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So has anybody got any other comments or any other input they would like to make at this time? Councillor Illingworth.
As the Conservative spokesman for this committee over the last 5 years, I'd like to thank all the officers and everybody who's taken part. We've had some interesting times, and I suspect today is one of the most interesting times. But I think we have, in many ways, achieved what we set out to achieve. So thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Hamilton. Thank you, Councillor Sarwar and Councillor Reid, for your comments. They're very much appreciated. And is there anybody else? No other comments? Then it all leaves me then to thank you all for your attendance today, to thank you for your hard work over the past 5 years, for some of you, and some of your more recent councillors, for your time here, and to, as I said earlier, wish those who are seeking re-election good luck in the next week or so. All will become clear very soon. And to my old friend Willie Wilson, who was previously my ward councillor but is now my ward colleague, I wish you a very long and happy retirement, Willie.
Thank you very much, convener. I appreciate your kind remarks, and I wish you well.
We've known each other a very long time, I think. So thank you very much, everyone.